Chapter 23. Huang Zhao's face turned red, and he caught the clothes with one hand. He turned around slightly, and quickly wrapped the clothes around his waist. His face turned from red to black, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Not human." He immediately searched around, but there was no trace of the high-level female zombie. In fact, the person was surprised by his words and asked, "Not human? Could it be a zombie?" Huang Zhao. Xiedong then asked, "Where is the high-level zombie you mentioned? Strange, why is there not a single zombie around here?" He looked around and it was strange that it was empty here. Not to mention the high-level zombie, there was not even a normal zombie. Only a few hundred meters away from the zombies could be seen. Huang Zhao didn't care so much, and his figure suddenly flashed, and he rushed to the distant ordinary zombies. He only saw that he chose a cleaner-looking male zombie, and cut off its head with a wind blade. Then he went forward and pulled off the zombie's pants. He didn't have any intention of thanking Lin Qiao for not killing him, and only gritted his teeth in hatred. It was just an intelligent zombie, but it made him so embarrassed. Being bullied by a zombie like this, how could he let it go? Next time he saw her, he must first cut off her human bones, and then cut open her head to take the zombie core. Next to this team, on the roof of a 10-story building, a figure stood in the corner, staring at them condescendingly. The eyes full of cold light flashed with killing intent and the desire for food. Xiedong's heart slightly moved, and a strange feeling flashed by. He didn't understand what this feeling was, and looked around inexplicably. But there was nothing unusual. On the other side, Lin Qiao had already hidden in the building on the other side. She leaned against the wall of a window, and her back was facing Xiedong's direction. Her eyes swept up from the window, and her eyes slightly flashed. On the 16th floor opposite the window, there was a strong hidden breath there. But the opponent's target wasn't her, but the group of living people. Although Lin Qiao knew that the breath wasn't aimed at her, she still had a strong sense of crisis in her heart. It seemed that the thing there was very powerful, but she couldn't tell what it was from the breath. Was it a high-level zombie? Or a zombie beast? Or a mutated beast? No matter what it was, she felt that these people were in danger. She knew that these people were no match for that thing. Just as Lin Qiao was wondering what that thing was going to do next, she suddenly lost track of its aura. She hurriedly looked over and saw that the shadow was no longer there. The aura had also disappeared without a trace. However, the sense of crisis in Lin Qiao's heart did not disappear. It only decreased a lot. Just as Lin Qiao was feeling puzzled, he suddenly sensed several human auras and scents. No, not just a few. The smell came from many people, and it was very messy. However, there were only a few powerful auras. One of them, in particular, made Lin Qiao feel depressed. No wonder that thing wanted to hide its aura, or should it say that it temporarily left? Because it couldn't beat the group of people who were approaching it. That's right, a group of people was heading their way. Lin Qiao took advantage of the fact that the other party was still far away to leave. He stealthily slipped away from a place where there was no one around. Not long after she left, a group of people appeared in the distance. Look, that seems to be the base's zombie hunting army. Xiedong's people also saw the gradually appearing army. It seems to be true. Right, this time it is the army that hunts zombies and collects supplies. It is Wu Chengyue's team. It should be them. Let's go. There are no more high-level zombies here. Even if there are, they won't be our turn to kill them. Huang Zhao wore a pair of pants that he had taken from a zombie, and looked at the army coming towards them. His face was full of fear and hidden jealousy. Xiedong shook his head and said, "No, let's go with them. It will be safer this way." He already knew what the strange feeling that flashed in his heart was. It was a sense of crisis, as if they were being targeted by a ferocious beast. He felt that they were being targeted by a powerful zombie. It was very likely that it was the one that led them here, or it could be something else. So at this time the base's zombie hunting army happened to pass by, so they could temporarily stay with them. There were strong people in the army, many of whom were level 4 paranormals. There were also a few level 5 paranormals. As one of the leaders of the base, Wu Chengyue's level was naturally very high, because in Haiqing base, there were only 3 level 7 paranormals. These 3 level 7 paranormals controlled the entire Haiqing base at the same time. Because of the unique wisdom, learning and adaptability of humans, the survivors after the apocalypse improved their strength very quickly. Not only had the strongest paranormals in Haicheng reached level 7, but many of the leaders of the other bases were also level 7 and above. In the post-apocalyptic world where zombies ran amok, it naturally formed the primitive law of the strong being respected. Hearing Xiedong's words, Huang Xiao immediately frowned and said, "Follow them? What can we gain by following them? We might even be used as cannon fodder to block the zombies." Of course, he was not willing to go with the strong people in the army because there would be high-level zombies there. If they were all killed by the strong people in the army, what would they have to do? At most, he would help them deal with the ordinary level 1 and level 2 zombies, and the zombie cores would be of no value. Leaving the base was originally to take risks, to seek wealth and danger. If it was not dangerous, how could there be a big harvest? Since that was the case, there was no need for them to form their own team to hunt zombies. Moreover, joining the army would give them resources other than the zombie cores they hunted. Other things obtained during the operation would be confiscated. What Huang Xiao said was not without reason, and Xiedong also thought so. But now that the situation had changed, his sense of danger had always been very accurate. Just now when he felt that they were being watched, he was sure that they were being watched. Moreover, the other party's aura was so well hidden that he could not feel it at all. If it was not for the feeling in his heart, he would not have known that his team was being watched. Therefore, it was more important to keep their lives. If they could not even keep their lives, what was the use of thinking about other things? With a serious face he said, "I feel like we're being watched. If we continue to act alone, we'll have to deal with them. If we continue to act alone, we might encounter great danger." Huang Xiao sneered and said in complete disbelief, "You always say that your sense is very accurate. But look at us, we have been out for so many days. We have been following you all this time. But we have not found anything except for dealing with a large number of low-level zombies every day. Not even the shadow of a high-level zombie has been seen. Today we finally saw one. Wasn't it because you guys were so slow that she ran away?" Chapter 24. As Huang Xiao spoke, he signaled to the rest of the team with his eyes. "Yes, Captain. Vice Captain is right. If we follow the army, we won't be able to survive. He wouldn't get anything just killing ordinary zombies for them to get zombie cores. We might as well hunt them ourselves." "That's right. Besides, it wasn't easy for us to encounter a high-level zombie. I don't think she's gone far. Maybe if we continue to chase after her, we'll be able to find her. We will meet again. Why are you following the army? Besides, there are so many of us. Even if she encountered a level 3 zombie, it would be impossible for her to escape. Even if we encounter a level 4, we can still put up a fight. Even if he couldn't win, couldn't he just run? Maybe if we work together we can kill a level 4 zombie. Wouldn't that be too much for us? That's a bag of rice and a clean quilt." That's right, that's right." The few who received the hint immediately said one after another for Huang Xiao. Xiedong frowned and said coldly, "We have never encountered a level 4 zombie before, so we don't know how strong they are. But my feelings can't be wrong. Captain, you're a rank 4 fire elemental expert. Why would he be afraid of a level 4 zombie? That's not right." Huang Xiao said with a smile. Although his expression was normal, his eyes were secretly hiding jealousy and hatred. "Exactly. Even if I'm a level 4 zombie, I'm not sure I can beat a level 4 zombie. And I heard that a level 4 paranormal is no match for a level 4 zombie." Xiedong frowned impatiently when he saw how stubborn these people were. Huang Xiao shrugged and said, "I don't care. I'm not going to follow the army anyway. Besides, they might not even let us follow them. Moreover, wouldn't he be laughed to death behind his back if those people saw him like this? Once he returned to the base, the news would spread. Wouldn't he lose all his face?" With this thought in mind, Huang Xiao moved his feet. He immediately headed in the other direction. Xiedong looked at everyone's eyes and saw that among the 9 of them, there were 6 or 7 who were unwilling to listen to him. Looking at the direction Huang Xiao had left in, he could only sigh and nod his head in compromise. "All right then. Let's get out of here now." Of course, he knew that Huang Xiao had a hostile view of him. Ever since they left the base this time, he had always been disagreeing with her and always did things without considering the consequences. It was a rampage. Of course, Xiedong had a lot of opinions about him, but there was nothing he could do. After all, he was the team leader. Other than having the highest combat power, he also protected them like a nanny. He still had to consider everyone's opinions. After all, if they were not united, internal strife would be the most dangerous. That was why he had been tolerating Huang Zhao's misdeeds. After they left, Wu Chengyue came over with his army of 1,000 soldiers. The 2 or 3 heavy-duty off-road vehicles in front had been modified. Not only could it defend against the claws of the zombies, but it could also smash through the zombie walls blocking the way. After the apocalypse, the cars were modified to have rows of steel spikes on the front of the car. It stretched outwards like a giant nail. Whenever the car crashed into something, blood and flesh would fly everywhere. Nothing could stop it. Behind the off-road vehicles were a few army green heavy trucks that had also been modified. The convoy opened up and stopped near where Xiedong and the others had just stopped. A particularly tall and strong man got out of the first car. Then a few more came down and there was a group of soldiers. As soon as these soldiers came down, they cleared an open space for the ordinary zombies around them. The tall man stood at the front, and his sharp eyes swept around. His gaze paused at the place where Xiedong and the others had just stood, and then moved away. At this time a man came up from behind. He was slightly shorter than the man in front, but his figure was still straight and tall, and the expression on his handsome face was very gentle. There was a faint smile in his eyes, and the corner of his mouth seemed to be hooked. It was hard to tell whether he was smiling or not. The man's temperament was gentle, and his momentum was restrained. A green camouflage uniform on his body slightly reduced his moist temperament. There was an extra serious temperament of a soldier. At this time he was completely different from the ferocious look he had on Lu Qianyu last time. But his brows were still slightly knitted, and a trace of worry was faintly discernible. He sighed slightly and said, "They left quite quickly, otherwise we would have harvested another level 4 zombie nucleus." The tall man turned around and glanced at him. He snorted coldly and said, "That zombie hunting team probably didn't even realize that they were being watched by something. There was only 1 level 4, 1 level 3 for level 2 paranormals, and a few ordinary people in the team. In front of the level 4 zombies they were simply delivering food. I thought they would see us and be smart enough to follow us. I didn't expect them to be a group of idiots." Wu Chengyue smiled gently, but the smile in his eyes did not deepen. He said, "Coming out of the base, we are originally looking for a better quality of life with our necks on the line. People's desires are like that. The more they want something, the more they have to take risks to get it." The tall man nodded in agreement. He turned around and shouted to the dozen level 5 paranormals behind him. "Team 1 to 5, take people around here to see if there are any clues about Xiao Lingling. Team 6 to 10, search for high-level zombies and kill them. Move." Yes. Among the dozen people behind him, 10 of them immediately straightened their backs. After responding, they immediately turned around and went to the back. He gathered his people and brought them out for the operation. At this time, a young woman hurriedly came out of the car. The woman looked to be in her early 20s, but she was actually 23 years old. She had a strange aura around her. It was the aura of a forest. She was not very beautiful, but she was not ugly either. She could only be said to be a little charming, a pretty girl from a humble family. Her little face was clean, and her eyes were clear and limpid. This woman was Wu Chengyue's adjutant Meng Yu, who had a level 5 plant ability. Meng Yu anxiously walked to Wu Chengyue's side, grabbed his arm and said, "Brother Yu, I can feel it. Xiao Lingling is nearby. Although the feeling is very weak, I can still feel it." Her words made the two people's expressions change. The faint smile on Wu Chengyue's face disappeared. He nervously looked at Meng Yu and asked in an excited and anxious tone, Where? Xiao Yu, can you feel where Ling Ling is?" If it wasn't for Meng Yu constantly saying that Ling Ling was fine, Wu Chengyue would not have been able to remain calm like this. When he heard Meng Yu say that she could feel his daughter, the aura around his body suddenly relaxed, and then he became restless. Meng Yu closed her eyes and sensed with a serious expression. She suddenly opened her eyes and a light flashed in them. She pointed in a direction and said, "Over there." Then she felt a flash of figures, and the two men in front of her had disappeared. Chapter 25. On the other side, Lin Xiao was running around the strawberry field. She didn't know that the large group of people was Xiao Budian's father in her space. Lin Xiao was thinking about a problem at this time, that was, how to let Xiao Budian eat strawberries. First of all, not to mention the unusual color of the strawberries, Xiao Budian's parents must have taught her not to eat outside things. Then there was the smell of strawberries, although it disappeared later. But Lin Xiao didn't know how the stench of strawberries disappeared. Was it because it was taken off for a long time? Or was it because she washed it in the lake in her space? Although Xiao Budian was willing to drink the water she gave him, she didn't know if he was willing to eat the strawberries she gave him. Lin Xiao thought of this and sped up her pace towards the strawberry field. But she didn't run far. She was blocked by someone again. Looking at the metal thorns that suddenly appeared in front of her, floating in the air out of thin air, the tips were all aimed at her. Lin Xiao had to stop. Why is it a zombie? A puzzled voice came from behind her. Lin Xiao silently turned around and saw that two tall men were standing 5 meters behind her without her noticing. As soon as she saw Wu Chengyue, Lin Xiao's dark eyes flashed. She wanted to immediately enter the space and bring Xiao Budian out, directly throw him on the ground and run. However, the problem was that in front of these two people, she didn't seem to have the strength to run away. At most she could enter the space again and hide. But if she brought Xiao Budian out, the other side may directly attack again. Just when she was still thinking about what to do, Xiao Yunlong had already made his move. Lin Xiao only felt a chill all over her body, and before her brain could react, her body had already instinctively reacted. She fiercely pressed her legs and jumped up, her body nimbly rolling in the air. After those metal thorns were inserted into the ground, she lightly fell down. Tianan didn't even say hello and directly attacked? There was no room for negotiation. Lin Xiao was so angry that she cursed in her heart, and the expression on her face also became a little sinister because of the change in her mood. Roar! She bared her teeth and growled at the two people. Wu Chengyue looked at Lin Xiao's movements in surprise, and then said to Xiao Yunlong, "His reaction is quite fast, he can even dodge your attack. Seems like it's not an ordinary level 3 intelligent zombie." Xiao Yunlong raised his eyebrows, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. She is angry. Only then did Lin Xiao realize that he looked a little strange, just like a real zombie. After hearing Xiao Yunlong's words, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. She twitched her nose slightly and sniffed the scent of these two people. How fragrant! The flesh and blood of high-grade mutants had been cleansed by the energy, making them pure and delicious. However, Lin Xiao could only sneak a few sniffs of the powerful aura coming from the two of them. Wu Chengyue turned his head and looked around. His mind was not on the zombie in front of him. He just wanted to find his daughter's location as soon as possible. Xiao Yunlong had been staring at Lin Xiao and saw Lin Xiao roll his eyes. Although her eyes were black for some reason, he could tell from her expression. Then he saw the female zombie secretly sniff a few times in his direction. A drooling emotion flashed across her eyes. Xiao Yunlong's eyes did not miss a single trace. He felt that this zombie was a little interesting, so he stared at Lin Xiao with great interest. For some reason, Lin Xiao could not sense the thoughts of these two people. It may be that the strength of the other party was too strong, so he blocked her senses. Lin Xiao's scalp tingled under the stare of the tall man opposite her, and she did not dare to move. She was afraid that if she made the slightest movement, the two people opposite her would directly kill her. Her current strength was not good enough, so she could only be honest. Lin Xiao could not send out the people in the space with her thoughts. She could only go in and pull them out. Lin Xiao felt that her current energy was too low, and had not reached that level, so she could not do it. When her energy level increased, she should be able to directly use her thoughts to control the things in the space. She faintly felt so. At this time Meng Yu also arrived. Meng Yu looked at Lin Xiao strangely and suddenly said, "Strange, why is it a zombie? Brother Yu, she has Lingling's breath on her body." Wu Qingyue's face changed when he heard this. His eyes flashed with a cold light, closely staring at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao was startled when she heard Meng Yu's words. Before she could understand why this woman could sense Wu Yueling's breath on her body, a strong sense of crisis suddenly rose in her heart, and a chill ran down her back. Boom! A bolt of purple lightning fell from the sky, and in the blink of an eye fell on top of Lin Xiao's head. "Brother, you don't." At the same time a scream rang out. Lin Xiao had no time to dodge, and by the time she reacted, the lightning had already fallen on her head. Her whole body suddenly shook, and then she felt that her whole body had entered into a state of stiffness and paralysis. Although she could not feel any pain, she had lost the ability to move. The strong smell of burning permeated the air around her body. Meng Yu pulled Wu Chengyue's arm in exasperation, saying, "Brother Yu, what are you doing? If you kill her, how am I going to find Lingling's breath?" Wu Chengyue smiled at her, saying, "Don't worry, I have a sense of propriety. I won't kill her. I will only temporarily make her lose the ability to move." Meng Yu let out a sigh of relief. She was afraid that Wu Chengyue would become agitated and turn this zombie into ashes. Roar. The numbness on Lin Xiao's body finally passed, and she angrily let out a roar. The feeling of being struck by lightning was really not good. Fortunately, she had the body of a zombie. Otherwise, wouldn't she die from the pain? But even if she was a zombie, the feeling of being struck by lightning was also very unpleasant. Okay? Although her body did not hurt, she felt dizzy, and her whole body was stiff, but she could not move. She could still feel a dull pain in her chest, which caused her breath to surge endlessly. The dull pain in Lin Xiao's chest felt like it came from her soul. It made her feel very uncomfortable. Damn it! She originally wanted to return Xiao Budian to him. She did not expect that this man would actually use lightning to strike her. She decided she was not going to return it. With this thought in her mind, Lin Xiao angrily roared at the three people. Suddenly her figure flashed, and she disappeared. The three people stared dumbfoundedly at the place where she disappeared. How did she disappear? Meng Yu stared, looking at the front with a confused face. Space ability? Xiao Yunlong also frowned. She is a level 4 zombie. Wu Qingyue's face slightly sank. The three of them actually made a level 4 zombie disappear in front of them. It should be said that she ran away. Meng Yu also reacted, and her eyes suddenly lit up. She said, "So, Lingling is actually in her space." Chapter 26. Wu Chengyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at her with the same thought in their eyes. Meng Yu finally understood and said, "No wonder my sense of the seed is so weak. It turns out that it is separated by a space. Fortunately, her level is not high, a little higher. Maybe I don't even have this weak sense." Xiao Yunlong suddenly looked at Wu Chengyue with a smile. "Look at you sent him away. Where are you going to go to see her now? Her space should have the ability to move. If she comes out again, she might be in another position." Hearing his words, Wu Chengyue's face darkened a lot. It was somewhat ugly to look at. The usual gentleness had disappeared. Meng Yu glared at Xiao Yunlong and angrily said to him, "Why are you so happy? Aren't you worried about Lingling? What if that zombie was keeping Lingling as a reserve food, and now it was provoked by you? What if it gets angry and goes in to eat Lingling?" Xiao Yunlong shrugged his shoulders and said, "I didn't do anything. But I don't know if you have found out. This zombie is a bit different from other high-level zombies." Wu Chengyue did not answer his words but looked at him. Meng Yu asked strangely, "What's different?" Xiao Yunlong said, "High-level zombies have intelligence. Their behavior is similar to humans. That's because they later learned it by imitating humans. But just now I observed this zombie and found that she does not have the hostility that other zombies have. And some of her human actions are very natural and do not seem to be imitated. No hostility meant that she did not kill or eat people. But as a zombie, how could she not eat people or kill people? Especially since it was a high-level zombie. Not eating people, that means that this zombie will not eat Wu Yueling." As soon as he said this, the other two people were silent. Wu Chengyue looked at the ground where Lin Xiao disappeared, thinking for a moment. He found that he really did not sense hostility from the female zombie. Could it be that this is a zombie that does not kill people? Meng Yu said with some disbelief, "How could it be? How can there be zombies that do not kill people? Humans are their food. They will instinctively rush to eat them when they see them. This is an instinct similar to that of a beast. It is impossible to change." Although she said that, her eyes were still filled with confusion. Of course, she also felt that there was no cruelty in the female zombie's aura. Because she was a Logia Esper, she was several times more sensitive to auras than the two men beside her. But she still couldn't believe it. Xiao Yunlong said again, maybe this female zombie is helping Lingling find her parents. She may not know it is you. In the end, after being bombarded by you, even if he finds out in the future, he probably won't return it to you. Wu Chongyue was inexplicably embarrassed by his words. Although he knew that what Xiao Yunlong said could not happen to zombies who had lost their humanity, but subconsciously, Wu Chongyue would rather believe that this was a miracle. Maybe his daughter was still safe and sound in that zombie space. Xiao Yunlong added, and didn't you notice, she did not have the slightest intention to attack. Originally, I wanted to tease her a little, but who knew that she would be struck away? Xiao Yunlong sighed regretfully. Looking at Wu Chongyue's increasingly gloomy face, Meng Yu couldn't help saying to Xiao Yunlong, well, don't say a few words. Now no matter what, we have to find this zombie first before we can find Lingling. Xiao Yunlong nodded and said, it seems that this is the only way. I will send people to search carefully within a few miles. Meng Yu also nodded in agreement and said, let's do it for the time being. I will go back and bring people to camp here first. Maybe this zombie has not left at all. When she comes out again, we can block her in time. With that, the two people began to act, leaving Wu Chongyue alone to guard in place. On the other side, Lin Xiao flashed into the space. She fell to the ground with a thud, and then lay motionless. The burnt smell of her body immediately passed into the space, and then was melted by the air in the space. As soon as she appeared, Wu Yueling in the space noticed her. She saw her charred body lying motionless on the open space by the lake. Wu Yueling felt a little strange. She looked at Lin Xiao with a puzzled expression. She thought, what's wrong with this zombie? Looking at Lin Xiao's appearance, it was somewhat familiar. This zombie's appearance was like those zombies that were struck by her father's ability. When her father struck people with lightning, the person struck would become like this. Wu Yueling didn't know that Wu Chongyue had never struck people into ashes in front of her. So she still didn't know that her father could strike people or zombies into ashes with one lightning strike. Because Wu Chongyue was afraid that it would have a bad influence on the children, he had never been ruthless in front of her. Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao's current appearance, and she didn't know why her heart was a little nervous. She was afraid that Lin Xiao would suddenly die like this. Then what would she do? She didn't know where this place was, but she had been here for so long. Except for a grassland and a small lake, there was only a vast expanse of whiteness. Nothing could be seen. She also didn't know how to get out. There was no one here. She had tried to walk to the edge of the white fog, but when she arrived in front of the white fog, she couldn't see anything clearly. She couldn't see anything inside, so she didn't dare to go in. So she had been staying by the small lake and in the grass. The only thing she saw in this place were this zombie that wouldn't hurt her, and the rabbit from before. But after the rabbit was released by the zombie, it ran into the grass and disappeared. And this zombie weaved grass dragonflies for her to play with, and fetched water for her to drink. Although she later took advantage of the zombie's absence to run to the lake, and used the grass funnel that the zombie left for her to fetch water for herself. But now when she saw the zombie come in, she was a little happy. But seeing that this zombie didn't look good, she was a little worried in her heart. Although Wu Yueling didn't know what worry was, she just didn't want to see this zombie like this. Seeing Lin Xiao appear, it lay on the ground and didn't move. Wu Yueling immediately ran over, stood 3 meters away from her and looked at her. Looking left and right for a while, she found that Lin Xiao still didn't move. Then she slowly stretched out a foot, took a step and another step. Wu Yueling carefully walked to Lin Xiao's side, turned in front of Lin Xiao, and stopped when she was a step away from her. Although this zombie had always shown that it wouldn't hurt her, she was still afraid that this zombie would suddenly jump up and pounce on her. Stopping beside Lin Xiao for a while, seeing that this zombie just closed her eyes and didn't react, then Wu Yueling slowly squatted in front of her, wanting to take a closer look at her face. What happened to her? Why didn't she get up? How long would she sleep before she woke up? Little Wu Yueling also didn't understand why, could only wait. Chapter 27. But after waiting for a long time, Wu Yueling did not see any reaction from Lin Xiao. She was very puzzled. Why was it like this? Thinking about it, Wu Yueling unconsciously stretched out her hand and gently pushed Lin Xiao's arm. Wake up! Wake up! After pushing a few times, Lin Xiao still did not open his eyes. Wu Yueling didn't know what to do. She stood up helplessly. When he turned around, he suddenly saw the lake beside him. That's right. Give her some lake water. Wu Yueling remembered that she was drunk and hungry, and she felt very uncomfortable. But after drinking the water given by the zombies a few times, she felt much better. Although he was still hungry, it wasn't to the point of having a stomachache. Thinking of this, Wu Yueling took the grass funnel that Lin Xiao had previously woven for her, ran to the lakeside, and clumsily got some lake water up. Then she carefully brought it to Lin Xiao and squatted down. He slowly poured the water from the funnel into Lin Xiao's mouth. However, Lin Xiao didn't open his mouth to let her pour the water into his mouth. The water slid down Lin Xiao's cracked lips to the ground. Wu Yueling was not discouraged. Instead, she stood up again. He continued to run to the lake to get some more water and poured it into Lin Xiao's mouth again. Just then she saw the zombie slightly open its mouth and caught the water she poured in. Wu Yueling was immediately overjoyed. Lin Xiao opened his eyes slightly and looked at Wu Yueling with his dark eyes. She hadn't actually fainted just now, but her chest was suffocating. That was why she kept her eyes closed and waited patiently for the feeling to pass. But she didn't expect that Wu Yueling in the space would be worried about her, and even give her water to drink. This surprised Lin Xiao. She could feel the little guy's thoughts, and her heart slightly relaxed. Did this little guy finally accept her? In fact, she also knew that Wu Yueling could accept her like this. It was only because he was afraid of being alone here. Children still wanted to be accompanied by others, even if Wu Yueling had autism. But she was in a strange environment and wanted to be with someone else. Lin Xiao moved his hands and found that his body was still very stiff, but he could still move. She propped herself up with her arms and slowly sat up. He looked at Wu Yueling, whose eyes were shining brightly, but her expression was still stiff as she looked at him. When Wu Yueling saw that she had woken up, she immediately retreated. He only retreated 3 meters away and wrapped himself in the blanket again. Lin Xiao glanced at her before lowering her head to look at her clothes. Just as she had imagined, it was already in tatters. Many of them had been burned, leaving only a few broken pieces hanging on the body. She raised her hand to touch her head and turned to look at her shoulders. As expected, his hair was also curled into an afro. Looking at his exposed arms and thighs, the originally gray skin had been charred black. Lin Xiao couldn't help but raise his head to look at Wu Yueling. He couldn't help but feel displeased with the little thing. It was all her father's fault. He actually used lightning to strike her. She couldn't even stand up right now. How was he going to send her out? Moreover, she didn't dare to go out now. What if Wu Chongyue brought people to guard there? Wasn't she walking right into the trap the moment she appeared? But if she didn't go out, she couldn't leave this place. She was in this space and couldn't see the situation outside. Lin Xiao thought about it and found that she had no way to get out for the time being. She just didn't know if she could let Wu Yueling out of the space. But she didn't know the situation outside. She was also afraid that if she let her out, Wu Chongyue and the others were not there. What if there were zombies there? Thinking about it, Lin Xiao stared at Wu Yueling and faintly found that the little thing's state seemed to be a little strange. Why did the little thing look more and more energetic? She clearly hadn't eaten anything. Why did the color return to her face? But soon she didn't have the mind to care about Wu Yueling. Because she was a little dizzy from the burnt smell, she remembered her current appearance. No, she still had to soak in the lake to get rid of the smell. And what should she do with her hair? A zombie's hair was already lifeless, so it would just die. Now that it was burnt and dry, it was useless to keep it. Might as well cut it off. Making up her mind, Lin Xiao struggled to get up from the ground. Controlling her not very flexible legs, she staggered slowly to the lake. As she walked, she used her claws to tear off the clothes on her body. She didn't need to use much strength to tear off the torn clothes. She just grabbed it with her hands. It directly broke into pieces and fell down. His charred body was exposed, and his waist was wrapped in layers of cloth. Stripping naked in front of the child, Lin Xiao looked back in the direction of Wu Yueling. She found that the child actually covered his eyes with his hands, as if he couldn't see it. Lin Xiao found it funny and then withdrew her gaze. She continued to untie the cloth wrapped around her waist. She looked at the hole on her stomach, which was burnt black again. It was so black that even her intestines couldn't be seen clearly. Lin Xiao looked up and walked down step by step, looking at the lake. She could tell from Wu Yueling's appearance after drinking the water here that she had been fine. She didn't know that the virus on her body didn't get into the lake, because she had taken a bath before. Maybe it was because there was too little of it so it didn't have any effect? She couldn't care so much now. At most, she could just go to the other side of the lake next time she wanted to drink water. After entering the water, Lin Xiao walked deeper and deeper. She walked until the lake water reached her chest before stopping. She stood and slowly rubbed the black skin on her body, feeling the cool lake water soaking her body. Lin Xiao's movements weren't fast, because she couldn't be fast at all. When she finally washed all the parts of her body that could be washed off, she was stupid again when she was ready to go ashore. The clothes that she had grabbed off were all torn to pieces, let alone wearing them. She couldn't even cover them. Then what should she wear? She didn't know if she would be willing to go to the little one to borrow the blanket that had been wrapped around her body. And running naked in the space, it felt like a pervert. Was she going to upgrade herself into a perverted zombie now? Lin Xiao thought of this at this time and her face darkened. Although it was already very black, struck by lightning. If she had known that she would be so short of clothes to wear, she would have killed the intelligent zombie before. Then she would have looked for clothes and brought them in. Now it was all good. She didn't even have a cloth to cover her body. That bastard Wu Chengwa. She didn't know if it was because of her heavy resentment or some other reason. Wu Yueling, who was standing not far away, actually sensed Lin Xiao's thoughts. This zombie wanted her quilt. But looking at the clothes that she had thrown on the ground, she definitely couldn't wear them. So Wu Yueling ran over with her blanket and threw it on the ground by the lake. She turned and ran away. Chapter 28. Looking at Wu Yueling, who threw down the blanket and ran away in surprise, Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. This little one was really quite smart and he was even considerate. She silently walked to the shore and bent down with some difficulty to pick up the blanket. Holding it in her hand, she stretched out her claws and used her sharp nails to scratch the blanket a few times. Then she cut a small blanket into 2 long strips of cloth. One piece was wrapped around her upper body, covering her scarred chest and blackened abdomen. The other piece was tied directly under her waist into a skirt. With the blanket wrapped into clothes, Lin Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. She smiled at Wu Yueling from afar. Then when Wu Yueling saw her terrifying smile, she immediately turned around and ran a few steps back. Lin Xiao. All right, although she did look a little like that now, could you not have such a big reaction, child? You looked like you were afraid that she would die just now. Lin Xiao turned around and walked to the lake, slowly squatting down. Fortunately, although her body was stiff, her joints could still bend. However, she couldn't move too fast or else she wouldn't be able to move at all. She looked at the reflection of the figure on the flat surface. Her hair was messy, and her facial features couldn't be seen clearly under the hair. She used her hand to push her hair to the back of her head, revealing her entire face. The wound on her face had healed at some point, leaving behind a large dark brown scar on her cheeks. A pair of strange pitch-black eyes emitted light. This appearance was indeed terrifying. She smiled and the scar on her face twisted. It was very scary. No wonder the little one ran away when he saw her smile. Lin Xiao imagined how Wu Yueling would feel when she saw her smiling face just now. Her current appearance was terrifying even if she covered it with her hair, and it would be even more terrifying if she exposed her face. It was better to cover it. She slowly stood up and walked in the direction of the grass. Then she found a cleaner place and sat down. She had a lot of things to think about now. Looking at Wu Yueling standing not far away, she didn't know if it was because of her space. This child's condition was slowly improving here. She didn't seem to be starving to death even if she didn't eat. This was very abnormal. Could it be that time had stopped here? That's not right either. Look at the way the grass grows. There was a flow of time here. Is that water? Could it be that Xiao Budian drank the water from the lake to ease the hunger in her body? But it was impossible for him to recover his bodily functions, right? She felt that her space was very mysterious, and she didn't know what special effects the lake had. Moreover, she had drunk quite a lot of the lake water. Lin Xiao suddenly remembered that when he first entered this space, he also fell asleep in the lake. Although she didn't know how long she had slept, her body had become flexible after she woke up. At that time, she didn't notice that it was a problem with the lake water. She thought it was a change in her body. Now that he thought about it, it should be the effect of the lake water. This lake water seems to be able to promote my zombie level. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao was delighted. It seemed that this space was indeed the golden finger she had obtained after her rebirth. There was also the mutated strawberry from before. After washing it with the lake water, it no longer smelled bad. So the lake water can also remove odors? After thinking it through, Lin Xiao's mood was not so depressed. But she looked at Wu Yueling and thought angrily in her heart. Originally, she wanted to send it back to that man, but now she didn't want to. She changed her mind. Who said that Wu Changyue was a good man? Who said that he was a gentle and kind person? He was clearly a smiling tiger, okay? He struck her with lightning without saying a word. She would remember this. Even if Lu Tianyu did that to him, Lu Tianyu was already dead. It had nothing to do with Lin Xiao. But how was she going to get out now? She didn't know what the situation was like outside. Was there someone guarding the place? It would be great if she could sense the thoughts of the people outside in this space. That way, she could know if there was anyone outside. Lin Xiao tried to close her eyes and listen attentively. Just as she closed her eyes and tried to sense, a hazy image suddenly appeared in her mind. The image was very familiar. It was the place where she entered the space. How could this be? As soon as Lin Xiao opened her eyes, the image immediately disappeared from her mind. Her eyes flashed with strong doubt and confusion, and then she closed her eyes again. Sure enough, as soon as she closed her eyes and thought about the situation outside, the image appeared in her mind again. It was even much clearer than before, but she couldn't see the color because it was all black, white, and gray. And the range was also expanding. She also saw some figures. These people were wearing camouflage and their faces were clean. They were all carrying guns and walking around casually. These were humans, not zombies. Other than seeing the image, Lin Xiao couldn't sense any aura. But she knew that this must be the situation outside. But this was enough. Because she saw an army station not far away, although it was only temporary. But without thinking, she knew that this was the army led by Wu Changyue. And the zombies in this area were basically cleared. There was no sign of a zombie at all. Lin Xiao lowered her eyelids and rolled her eyes, and the scene outside also changed. Looking from left to right, she found that it seemed to be evening outside. There were soldiers in military uniforms coming and going, and there were even people sitting together in twos and threes. As expected, there were people guarding here. How could she sneak out now? With so many people, she was afraid that once she appeared, she would be surrounded. Lin Xiao thought bitterly in her heart, while observing the situation outside. Unfortunately, she couldn't sense what the people outside were thinking. Otherwise, she might know more about the situation and be able to adapt. Opening her eyes, the scene outside in Lin Xiao's mind disappeared. It was as if her eyes were a switch. Once she closed them, she could see the situation outside. But once she opened them, she would be cut off from the outside. As soon as she turned around, she suddenly saw Wu Yueling, who she didn't know when she sneaked up to her. She stood less than half a meter away from her, silently looking at her. Suddenly seeing Lin Xiao open her eyes, Wu Yueling's eyes froze for a moment. Her feet moved, and she subconsciously wanted to run again. But she only took half a step before she pulled back, and continued to stand there looking at Lin Xiao. She was still a little afraid of Lin Xiao, but she couldn't help but want to stay by her side. Lin Xiao looked at her, and didn't want to move anymore. She just sat there and rested. She didn't know why, but after looking at the situation outside twice, she felt a wave of fatigue. He felt a wave of fatigue, and his whole body felt sluggish. Not physically but mentally. Chapter 29. As she sat there, she fell asleep again. Then she had a dream. In the dream, she went out of the space. But the people around her didn't notice her, as if she was invisible. Then she broke into a run, and no one noticed her. And her movements weren't stiff at all, and her legs looked very flexible. She kept running in the direction of the strawberry field. and didn't know how long she ran before she saw the strawberry field. Then Lin Xiao woke up and opened her eyes to look. She found that she was still in the space. She thought that she wanted to leave so badly that she had this dream, but she felt that she was very strange. Would normal zombies have dreams? Lin Xiao opened her eyes and found that she was still sitting cross-legged on the ground, as if she was meditating. She could also fall asleep like this. It was really strange. She felt a little thirsty and looked at Wu Yueling, who was sitting beside her. She found that she didn't know where she found some hay and made a thick layer on the ground. Then she sat on it and played with the grass dragonflies she made. Lin Xiao stretched her legs and felt that they were still a little stiff, but she didn't know why, but there was a faint sour feeling. She used a lot of strength to stand up from the ground with great difficulty. She slowly walked towards the lake, but then she remembered that this was the place where she took a bath. So she walked around the lake all the way to the other side of the lake. Looking back at Wu Yueling, who was walking behind her, Lin Xiao felt that this child was a little dependent on her. She walked very slowly and her legs were a little heavy, and there was a kind of sour feeling. It was a little difficult to walk. Lin Xiao's attention was focused on walking and the lake, as well as the question of why zombies could dream. He didn't notice why his legs were sore. Logically speaking, she was a zombie, so she shouldn't have any feelings. If she found this out, maybe she would find that her body had some incredible changes. But she didn't find it. She spent half an hour to go around to the other side of the lake. She stopped by the lake, and then slowly squatted down on the edge of the lake. She used her hands to directly drink the water, and drank a few mouthfuls. She felt a little better. After drinking the water, Lin Xiao took a few steps back. Standing by the lake, he closed his eyes to see if there was anyone outside. However, the scene that appeared in his mind this time was not the place where he had entered the space. Lin Xiao hurriedly opened his eyes. A trace of uncertainty flashed through his eyes before he immediately closed them again. Sure enough, the scene this time was still not the location of the city where he entered the space. This time she saw a field of strawberries. A mutated strawberry field. Lin Xiao opened his eyes again and was in a daze. He couldn't understand how he could see the scene of the strawberry field. Could it be that her previous thoughts were wrong? What he saw was not fixed at the place where she entered the space. Was it because he could see wherever he wanted? At this thought, Lin Xiao closed his eyes and tried to see where the soldiers were. However, he couldn't see anything. His mind was still filled with a field of strawberries. Moreover, it was the same place she had been to before. How could this be? Could it be that she had already left her original position? Or was it just a figment of his imagination? Would he appear in the place where Wu Changyue and his men were guarding when he went out? Lin Xiao thought it was possible, but the scene in his mind was very clear. The moon hung high in the sky, indicating that it was the middle of the night. Had she really arrived at the field of strawberries? This thought had been tightly grasping Lin Xiao's mind. She wanted to go out, but she didn't dare to. On one hand, she was afraid that his thoughts were wrong, but on the other hand, she wanted to confirm whether his thoughts were correct. Plop! At this moment, the sound of a stone falling into the water suddenly sounded. Lin Xiao opened his eyes and found Wu Yueling squatting on the ground by the lake. She picked up a small stone on the ground and threw it into the water out of boredom. However, his expression seemed to be wondering if there was anything else in the lake. Lin Xiao gritted his teeth and decided to go out for a while. He had to confirm the situation. Otherwise, he would make her feel very uncomfortable. If he went out and was still in the original position of the soldiers, she could immediately change her mind and come back. It would probably take less than a second. She didn't believe that those people would be able to react and attack her in such a short time. With a decision in his heart, Lin Xiao took a deep breath. Then he thought to himself, go out. In a flash, a real strawberry field appeared in front of her. It wasn't just a figment of her imagination. Lin Xiao's eyes widened, and a gleam of surprise flashed across her dark eyes. She turned in a circle and found that she was really in the field of strawberries. Not in the city. She still remembered that dream. In the dream, she ran for a long time to reach the field of strawberries. But in reality, it was only about 10 kilometers from Wu Changyue's place to this field of strawberries. She didn't have to run for long at all. But in her dream, she ran for a long time. Why was it like this? What happened? Lin Xiao couldn't figure it out. She felt that her head was a little big. If she could move space just by dreaming, then she would have to escape from space in the future. Does it mean that I only need to have a dream? But what if she wasn't dreaming? Or if she couldn't have such a dream? This dream wasn't something that she could control. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao felt like crying. She had such a good skill, but she didn't know where the switch was. This feeling is so painful, isn't it? She took a look at her surroundings and confirmed that she wasn't dreaming this time. Lin Xiao bent down and picked 2 hands full of strawberries. Actually, there weren't many, just 6 or 7. Then she entered the space. As soon as she entered, she saw Wu Yueling looking around in a daze and at a loss. She didn't know what she was looking for. When she came in, Wu Yueling's eyes were immediately glued to her. Then her eyes turned red, and she stared at her with a face full of grievance and dissatisfaction. Lin Xiao. What was this child trying to do? Because she couldn't sense the little one's thoughts, she could only stretch out her hands. She stretched out the strawberries in her hands towards her. Wu Yueling was stunned when she saw the strawberries. Then, she immediately covered her nose and turned her face away. She ran a few steps to the side with a look of disgust. So smelly. This time Lin Xiao could sense her thoughts. Lin Xiao thought for a moment. How could she coax this child to eat strawberries? No matter what, she had to wash it first and see if the lake water could get rid of this unpleasant smell. She turned around and walked to the side of the lake. Her movements weren't very agile. She put the big strawberries on the shore and carefully scrubbed them one by one in the water. Chapter 30. Seeing her movements, Wu Yueling covered her nose and moved closer to her, but still kept a distance of 1 or 2 meters. After washing the strawberries, Lin Xiao found that there was nothing to put on the strawberries. So she was stunned again. Suddenly, she thought that the leaves of the strawberries seemed to be very large. She might as well go out and pick a few leaves to put the strawberries in. Thinking of this, she gently put a few washed strawberries on the ground. Then she disappeared again. Out of the space, she picked a few large pieces of leaves and came in. Then she washed them with the lake water and brushed them. Then she washed the strawberries again and wrapped them with the leaves. This time the stench was gone. Holding the strawberries with both hands, Lin Xiao walked a few steps to the edge of the grass. Then she put the strawberries on the ground with the leaves, stood up, looked at Wu Yueling and waved to her. Seeing her waving, Wu Yueling's eyes were full of confusion. She pinched her nose tightly and didn't come over. She just stood there and watched. Seeing that she didn't come over, Lin Xiao's ears suddenly twitched. She heard a little movement. She turned her head and saw the shadow of a small gray furball coming out of the grass. It stood by the grass and looked at Lin Xiao and the strawberries at her feet. Lin Xiao looked at it and was surprised to find that the rabbit's eyes were shining at the strawberries at her feet. It seemed to want to come over but didn't dare. The rabbit's expression was exactly the same as Wu Yueling's. Lin Xiao thought, are these two the same kind? Looking at the desire in the rabbit's eyes, Lin Xiao tried to throw one of the smallest strawberries to it. The rabbit was startled by the strawberry that was suddenly thrown at it. It turned around and jumped directly into the grass. Lin Xiao stood still. Sure enough, after a few seconds, the rabbit stuck its head out of the grass and looked around. It found that there was no danger. She jumped out and moved to the side of strawberry. It held the strawberry with its 2 short front paws and immediately turned around and slipped into the grass again. She forced it to eat before, but it refused. Now it came to snatch it from her. After watching the rabbit take the strawberry away in confusion, Lin Xiao turned around and waved to Wu Yueling. Come here. Lin Xiao looked at Wu Yueling's sparkling eyes and said to her in his heart. She didn't know if her thoughts could be conveyed, but her gaze did. Then she saw Wu Yueling shake her head at her. Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment. Then he thought hesitantly, did he hear my thoughts? She picked up a strawberry and sniffed it. Then he waved his hand at Wu Yueling and said to her in his heart, come here, the strawberries are washed. It doesn't stink. After saying this in his heart, Lin Xiao stared at Wu Yueling, waiting for her reaction. She wasn't sure if the little guy shook his head because he heard her thoughts. He was smart enough to guess it from his eyes and movements. But no matter which one it was, it meant that he could communicate with her. If Wu Yueling didn't speak, she would never speak. Even to Wu Changyue he would not speak. He had always been using his actions to express his thoughts, so she might be able to guess what he meant from his actions. Lin Xiao indicated that the strawberries had been washed and didn't stink. Wu Yueling moved. She slowly loosened the hand that was pinching her nose. Then she raised her nose and sniffed in the direction of the strawberries to make sure that she didn't smell the stench just now. Then she put her hand down. But she didn't walk towards Lin Xiao. It really doesn't stink? Will she lie to me? But this strawberry is poisonous, right? Will I die if I eat it? But the rabbit just now also ate it last time. It didn't die. Wu Yueling thought to herself. She looked at Lin Xiao while feeling conflicted. Lin Xiao sensed her thoughts and didn't stand still. She turned slightly and sat on the ground next to the strawberries. Then she picked up the strawberries and sniffed the sweet smell. No wonder the rabbit ran over so quickly. It turned out that its nose was also very sensitive. However, this sweet smell did not have any allure to Lin Xiao. It didn't arouse her appetite. But the smell of Wu Yueling made her salivate. Lin Xiao glanced at Wu Yueling vaguely. Then she waved at her. Seeing her look over, Lin Xiao pointed at the strawberry in her hand. Then she put the strawberry in her mouth and took a bite. The smooth and tasteless texture was still not tasty. The inside of the strawberry was pink, which was different from its skin. Lin Xiao finished the strawberry in 2 or 3 bites. Then she spread her hands at Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling was starting to believe Lin Xiao's words. She slowly walked over. As she walked, she sniffed hard to see if the stench was still there. But when she walked all the way to Lin Xiao's side, she didn't smell the stench just now. Lin Xiao picked up a beautiful and plump strawberry and handed it to her. There were still water droplets on the strawberry. She said to her with her eyes, "Eat it. It's not poisonous." But she was afraid that Wu Yueling didn't understand what she meant. She pointed at the strawberry and shook her hand. Then she drew her hand across her neck. She closed her eyes, tilted her head, and stuck out her tongue. She made a dead face for Wu Yueling to see. Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling had already understood what she meant. But when she saw Lin Xiao make such a ghost face, she suddenly felt strange. She didn't know how to react. Lin Xiao opened her eyes and looked at Wu Yueling, who was in a daze. She didn't sense her thoughts, but Wu Yueling looked at her as if she was looking at a lunatic. Lin Xiao was silent. Was she being looked down upon by this child? Was it? Was it? Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao as if she was a lunatic. Then she silently reached out and took the strawberry that Lin Xiao was still holding in the air. She carefully put it in front of her nose and smelled it. There was no stench. Instead, there was a very nice sweet smell. She pinched it with her hand. It felt a little soft. Lin Xiao stretched out a finger and pointed at her mouth. She meant for her to take a bite to test the taste. Wu Yueling looked at her hesitantly and guessed for a while. She didn't dare to eat it for fear that it would be poisonous. But now, the smell of the strawberry seemed to be very delicious. It was so fragrant and sweet. Would it be very sweet when she tasted it? Lin Xiao looked at her confused face. She didn't even need to sense what she was thinking. She pointed in the direction where the rabbit ran and said, "It's okay. The rabbit isn't dead." Then Wu Yueling seemed to finally be unable to resist the temptation of the strawberry fragrance. She opened her mouth and took a small bite. She chose to believe in Lin Xiao. A sweet taste with a hint of sourness spread on the tip of her tongue. Wu Yueling's eyes immediately lit up. She took a big bite and ate it with a look of enjoyment on her face. She didn't care that it was poisonous and couldn't be eaten. She ate noisily. Her stomach was empty. She had been hungry for a long time. Chapter 31. Seeing that the little girl finally ate something, Lin Xiao was slightly relieved. But she couldn't just eat strawberries, she had to find other food for her. Since she didn't plan to return it for the time being, she had to find food for her first. She also had to find a few sets of clothes for herself. And she had to find a way to change the current condition of her body. It wasn't a good idea to be so stiff all the time. And her level seemed to be a bit low and her strength was too weak. She had to improve her strength. Otherwise, if she encountered a level 5 zombie leader or a psychic above level 5, she would be completely abused. Or there was still time to hide in the space. She just didn't know how to improve her strength. Was she going to kill zombies and take their cores like other zombies? But she didn't seem to have any reaction to the level 3 intelligent zombies core? Or should she kill people to take their cores? But she couldn't just kill people. If the target was a bad person. In this post-apocalyptic world, there were really a lot of bad people. Wasn't Lu Tianyu one? And the ones who harmed her to death? If Lin Xiao returned to her original strength, she wouldn't have to worry about Lin Yong and the others. She could directly fight with them, and there might be a chance of winning. In short, if she wanted to go to the south to find her family, she had to improve her strength first. Otherwise, she didn't know what she would encounter on the way. In this world, zombies weren't the only scary things. Thinking about it, Lin Xiao wanted to turn around and leave the space, but she suddenly thought of the helpless and wronged expression on Xiao Budian's face when she came in. She felt that she might be bored or annoyed by being alone. Why not catch that rabbit for her to play with? But although the rabbit was small, it seemed to be very fierce. It would bite, right? She moved her ears and carefully listened to the movements in the grass around her. She sniffed again. Then she confirmed the location of the rabbit. Lin Xiao stood up, turned around, and walked slowly into the grass. Wu Yueling looked at her curiously, not knowing what she was going to do. After a while, she saw Lin Xiao come out with the rabbit. Lin Xiao grabbed the soft hair behind the rabbit's neck, and the rabbit shrunk its hind legs. Its two front paws were still holding the half-eaten strawberry, and its ears were drooping. Its two red eyes were wide open. She walked in front of Wu Yueling and extended the rabbit in front of her. Wu Yueling looked up at her, then at the rabbit. His expression was a little dazed and confused. Was this for her? She didn't want it. This rabbit was so ugly. No. Wu Yueling took a few glances at the rabbit and suddenly twisted her face, looking disgusted. Lin Xiao, who sensed her thoughts, was speechless. Didn't they say that little girls like furry animals? Who said that? Come out. Although the rabbit was a little gray, it wasn't ugly. His eyes were round and his ears were long. Her teeth weren't so big that they were about to protrude. She was clearly quite cute. Lin Xiao looked at the rabbit in front of her and confirmed that it was still very cute. Then he stretched his hand out in front of Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling still turned her face away, not even looking at him. She continued to nibble on her strawberries. Lin Xiao put the rabbit down and poked Wu Yueling's head. The child hadn't washed his hair for many days. The ponytail on his head was loose and had a layer of grease on it. After being poked by her, Wu Yueling looked up at her. Lin Xiao pointed at the sky and then at herself. Then she disappeared. She did this to tell her that she would do the same before leaving next time. Wu Yueling saw Lin Xiao suddenly disappear and was stunned for a moment. Then her eyes turned red and her mouth pouted. She looked around in a panic but didn't see Lin Xiao. Maybe she was used to the previous experiences, but she still didn't see Lin Xiao after a few glances. After making sure that she had really left, Wu Yueling calmed down again. She continued to nibble on her strawberry silently and finally finished the whole strawberry. After finishing, she looked down at the remaining strawberry on the ground. She sat down and picked up another one to continue eating. After Lin Xiao left the space, she looked at the strawberry field. The moonlight shone on the ground like a faint layer of silver. Strawberries couldn't be kept in the space for long after they were picked. She wondered if the seedlings could be planted in the space. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao immediately bent down in the strawberry field and began to dig at the roots of a strawberry with her claws. She didn't know how to plant, so she could only dig out the whole strawberry with the soil. Then she threw it directly into the space. Fortunately, her claws were very useful, so it was easy for her to dig. But because her body was not very flexible, her movements were very slow. After an hour, the entire strawberry field had been hollowed out by Lin Xiao. After digging up dozens of strawberries, Lin Xiao finally stopped. Then her figure flashed and she entered the space. As soon as she entered, she found that the strawberry plants were thrown in the middle of the grass, and the grass there was crushed. Wu Yueling was holding the last two strawberries at this time and was far away, because the strawberries that Lin Xiao threw in were still full of strawberries. These strawberries hadn't been picked or washed, so there was no need to talk about the stench. It immediately made the air in this place stinky. Lin Xiao didn't mind the stench. She slowly separated these strawberries one by one. Then she began to dig holes in the grass in the space and directly planted these strawberries. This series of actions also took her a long time to complete. After she finally finished planting the strawberries, she stood up and looked at Wu Yueling's figure. She found that she had already run to the other side of the lake and was curled up in a ball sleeping on the grass. Lin Xiao suddenly patted her forehead. She should have gotten something to sleep on first, but in the end she forgot about it. Looking at the little one sleeping on the grass like this, she looked so pitiful. Lin Xiao went to the lake to wash her hands and washed all the mud off her hands. Then she looked at the strawberries behind her, and they were all listless. They had to be watered in a while. Her figure flashed and she exited the space, her gaze sweeping the surroundings. She saw that there seemed to be a house not far away. It should be the place where the owner of this strawberry field lived before the end of the world. She lifted her feet and walked towards the house. After a while, she reached the front of the house. This was a house with a flat roof, and the doors and windows were already broken. The things in the house had been turned upside down, and it was obvious that it had been ransacked. But that was a long time ago because now these things were covered with a thick layer of dust. Lin Xiao walked in and looked inside. There weren't many things here, and basically everything that could be used had been taken away. She wandered around in the bedroom and living room, but she couldn't even find a broken quilt. She found a dusty mat, and it was a bamboo mat. But because it was a bamboo mat, it didn't spoil after being left for so long. Chapter 32. She took the mat out of the house and hung it on the railing outside. Then Lin Xiao looked around and broke off a branch with a leaf on it. She patted the mat hard with the leaves, and the dust on it immediately flew all over the sky. Lin Xiao subconsciously covered her nose, and the hand holding the branch stretched far away. She patted and swept. After a while, she saw that there was no more dust flying. She stopped and turned back into the house. There was only one house nearby. Apart from the mat, she also found some old clothes, some of which were already rotten. But fortunately, there were still two that could be worn. Although they were all male, Lin Xiao, who was already naked, didn't care about the difference between men and women. She shook the dust again. Finally, Lin Xiao found some pots, bowls, ladles, and so on. Anyway, as long as it was useful, she threw it into the space. Beds, tables, stools, chairs, and sofas were all thrown in. But not much. After seeing that she had moved all the things in this house, Lin Xiao turned back into the space. Originally, there was only grass in the space, and she didn't care about it when she was alone. Anyway, she just needed to lie down on the ground and she could fall asleep. Although zombies didn't seem to need to sleep. But now there was a child living in her space, and she couldn't let the child sleep on the ground. He had a blanket as a cushion before, but now the blanket had been torn apart by her. Fortunately, this strawberry field used to be inhabited, and the owner's things were not all broken. After Lin Xiao moved all the things in, she piled them up in another place far away from the strawberry field. After she came in, she began to be busy again. She swept the dust, wiped the dust, and washed the things. Anyway, she just took a rag and wet it with the lake water. Then she wiped the beds, tables, and chairs and washed the pots, bowls, ladles, and so on. After washing, she dragged the wooden bed to a flat place, and then used her hands to pick a lot of grass and spread it on the bed. Then she spread the bamboo mat on the grass. After doing all this, she went around to the other side of the lake. She gently picked up Wu Yueling, who was still asleep, and then walked back. Then she put her on the bed. Wu Yueling lay on the bed and didn't wake up. She just unconsciously curled up into a ball. Lin Xiao picked up an adult's shirt, shook it clean and put it on her. She then turned around and took the other clothes to the lake to wash them. After washing them, she spread them out on the grass to cool them. After being busy for a while, Lin Xiao finally finished cleaning up. Then she took a bucket and went to water the strawberries. Lin Xiao, who had been busy, didn't realize that her movements had become much more agile. His body was no longer as stiff as before. After watering, Lin Jizai sat on the only rotten sofa to rest. Although she really didn't feel tired, it seemed that the more she did, the more energetic she became. She just suddenly finished her work and had nothing to do, so she just sat there. Sitting cross-legged on the sofa, she closed her eyes and sensed the situation outside. When he found nothing out of the ordinary, he got off the sofa and left the space. It was already bright outside. She had been busy all night cleaning up the furniture and whatnot. She doesn't know if the strawberries she dug into the space will come back to life. In fact, Lin Xiao wasn't sure about this. After getting out of the space, Lin Xiao began to bypass the area where Wu Chengyue was. She planned to go into the city first and see if there was a bookstore or a big supermarket. Maybe she could find a map there. She still casually put on a loose shirt, although it was unwashed. But for Lin Xiao, who was a zombie, wearing it didn't have any psychological barriers. After getting out of the space, Lin Xiao noticed that her body seemed to be a lot more relaxed. She also found that her movements could be flexible, and she could do whatever she wanted. It seemed that the effect of the lightning strike had passed. Lin Xiao shook hands. She didn't know why, but she faintly had a strange feeling. It seemed that after being struck by lightning this time, her strength seemed to have increased a lot. She thought and immediately stopped. Looking at a tree on the side of the road, she hesitantly walked over. Standing under the tree, Lin Xiao showed her claws. The dark claws were sharp, shining with a metallic luster. She glanced at the branch on the tree that was more than 3 meters tall and as thick as an arm. She suddenly jumped over and fiercely slashed at the branch. Pa hua la hua sha. The sound of wood falling to the ground was followed by the sound of rustling leaves. Lin Xiao looked at the branch that she had cut off. The part that was cut off was smooth and neat. It didn't look like she had cut it off with her nails at all. It looked like she had used a very fast and sharp knife to cut it off at once. But she looked at her own claws. The length was only about 10 centimeters, not very long. And the cut on this branch was about 4 centimeters in diameter. How could her claws cut such a smooth cut? Because her nails weren't long enough. And when she used her claws to cut it just now, she didn't seem to feel that her nails had touched anything. But the tree branch was indeed cut off. Lin Xiao stared at her claws for a long time, but she still couldn't figure it out. She stood up and stepped on the tree branch. She stretched out her claws and slashed at the branch behind the tree branch. This time she felt something. It was as if a few rays of light flashed in her claws. Before her claws could touch these tree branches, they seemed to have been cut by an air blade and then broken in advance. So useful. Lin Xiao looked at her claws and her eyes suddenly lit up. She looked at the main branch of the tree, which was about as thick as a thin woman's waist. She thought for a moment and raised her hand. She swung her claws hard and swung them at the tree branch. Cha! A crisp sound rang out. Lin Xiao looked at the 4 deep scratches on the tree branch, and her eyes lit up. She leaned over and sized up the depth of the scratches. She found that among the 4 scratches, the one on her index finger was the deepest. She had already cut off 2/3 of the tree branch. Lin Xiao raised her hand, pressed the tree branch on top of her claws and pushed hard. She was very strong. When the tree was pushed by her, there was only a kacha sound. The entire tree slowly fell backwards. She retracted her hand and turned around in satisfaction. She walked towards the city. It seemed that the attack power of her claws had increased again. Not long after she walked out, she suddenly smelled a few different auras. A few humans and a very powerful zombie. Lin Xiao's sharp senses told her that this zombie was probably at the peak of level 4 or above. And she was a little familiar with the auras of those humans. Weren't they the superhumans who wanted to stop her during the day yesterday? Chapter 33. A burst of flames soared into the sky. The fire wasn't too conspicuous in the daytime. However, the burning flames leaped up high. There were traces of fire all around. Xia Dong and the other 4 stood in a group, desperately using their abilities to deal with the zombies in front of them. At this moment, the 5 of them looked very embarrassed, and their eyes revealed despair. A level 4, a level 3, and 3 level 2 ability users. This was originally not a simple team. If they were outside the base, even if they encountered a level 4 ability zombie, they would still have the power to fight it. However, this time they did not encounter a level 4 but a level 5. Because the 5 of them were surrounded by a large number of ordinary zombies. And these ordinary zombies were all controlled, desperately rushing towards the group of humans. They opened their mouths wide. Their eyes filled with the desire for food. They stretched out their hands into claws, wanting to come forward and tear these humans apart. Xia Dong and the other 4 had their backs against each other, forming a circle and throwing out ability attacks at the zombies that rushed over. With the help of Huang Zhao's wind ability, Xiadong turned his fire ability into a circle of fire, trapping them inside the fire wall. As long as the zombies approached, they would immediately be caught by the fire wall and burned. On the other side of the zombie horde, a skinny figure stood there, his eyes flashing with wild sharpness and cold-killing intent. This was the appearance of a man in his 40s or 50s, but his body had changed too much. One could only vaguely see his age before he died. It was impossible to tell what he looked like. At this moment, both of its eyes were pitch black, but there was an obvious red light flashing in the middle. It was like the pupils of a beast, firm and determined. Its back was bent, and it stood there with its legs upright. Its hanging hands were somewhat deformed. Its hands became huge, and its 5 fingers were twice as long as a normal person. Its sharp nails were 3 centimeters long. It looked incomparably hard. This zombie's face, in addition to its black eyes, had an infrared glow, and its mouth was also cracked to the ears. But at this time it did not open its mouth, so only a rough crack could be seen. However, there were stains of fresh blood on this mouth. It calmly looked at the 5 humans in the encirclement of zombies. Its eyes did not have the strong desire of other zombies. This was a level 5 zombie leader. A zombie leader of this level could not only control hundreds of ordinary zombies, but also make them act according to their orders. It could also control a small number of intelligent zombies. Take the 2 beside it for example. The aura of a level 5 zombie was very strong, so the intelligent zombies next to it didn't dare to go against its will. Otherwise, they would be torn to shreds and have their corpse cores eaten. At this time, Xiadong and the others saw the calm zombie in front of them. He also recognized that it was a level 5 zombie leader. Their eyes were filled with despair, but they were unwilling to persevere. While madly attacking the ordinary zombies outside the firewall, they were also thinking of ways to escape. But they all knew that there was no way for them to escape the pursuit of this level 5 zombie. There were originally more than 10 people, but now there were only 5 of them who were relatively strong. The others had already been torn apart and eaten by a large number of zombies. At this moment, Xiadong regretted not forcing everyone to follow the army. Instead, he left with them. Well, now his premonition was correct. It turned out that the dangerous feeling of being targeted was brought by this level 5 zombie. The 5 of them didn't speak because it was useless to say anything now. A trace of darkness flashed in Huang Zhao's eyes. He faintly glanced at Xiadong who was beside him. Then he gave the others a look, and the other 3's eyes immediately flashed a trace of understanding. At this time, Xiadong also couldn't hold on anymore. He had used too much of his ability, and at this time his energy core was showing signs of drying up. But he didn't dare to stop because as soon as he stopped, the others wouldn't be able to hold on for more than 30 seconds, and they would be torn apart by the zombies that pounced on them. Moreover, the zombie leader didn't even make a move. Not to mention the zombie leader, even the intelligent zombies around it. They just stood there and watched quietly, waiting for their side to die of exhaustion. I can't hold on anymore. My energy is almost exhausted. We have to find a way to hold on. Although Xiadong's tough face was still calm, his face was a little pale. Sweat seeped out of his forehead and dripped down. At this time, Huang Zhao's eyes suddenly flashed, and he secretly nodded to the other 3. Then he turned his head to Xiadong and said, I have a way to temporarily hold on. But when Xiadong heard this, his heart was filled with joy. He really thought that Huang Zhao had a way. He quickly asked, what way? A trace of mockery flashed on Huang Zhao's face. He smiled and said, the way is to use you as a shield. As he said this, he suddenly withdrew his ability, and then suddenly turned around and kicked out. He directly kicked the unprepared Xiadong away. Then the 4 of them suddenly grabbed each other's hands, and then suddenly disappeared from where they stood. When the surrounding zombies saw Xiadong suddenly being kicked out, their movements paused for a moment, and then they all rushed towards the unprepared Xiadong. Huang Zhao and the others took advantage of this moment, and in the blink of an eye, entered one of the other people's space. After Xiadong was kicked out, his face changed and became extremely ugly. He never thought that he would be betrayed by his teammates. But fortunately, his reaction was top-notch, and he had been in the special forces before. The moment he was kicked out, he quickly rolled in the air, and the flames in his hands shrank, and then quickly wrapped himself into a fireball. The zombies that rushed towards him immediately burned when they came into contact with his flames. Huang Xiao. Xiedong gritted his teeth and said Huang Xiao's name. His voice was filled with intense hatred and disbelief. He knew that Huang Xiao was not happy with him, but he did not think that the other party would go to this extent of betraying him. He actually wanted him to die in the mouths of these zombies. And among them, there was actually a spatial ability user. And it was a space that could bring people in. But he did not know about it at all. Those people usually sided with Huang Xiao, and they were all on his side. It was fine if they did not let him know that they had spatial abilities, but he did not expect them to actually work together to push him out. To think that he had risked his life to protect these people, each and every one of them were ungrateful and ungrateful. Xiedong suddenly felt that Huang Xiao and the others must have been waiting for him to run out of energy before they made their move. Because this was the only way he would definitely die. The other party had been scheming against him all along. No wonder when he used his ability to cooperate with him just now, he did not feel his full strength. He didn't feel Huang Xiao's full strength, and he thought that Huang Xiao's ability was almost exhausted. Now that he thought about it, it was probably not the case. Chapter 34. Lin Xiao came to a tree from afar and directly entered the space. Then she closed her eyes in the space and sensed the situation outside. She knew that the level 5 zombie had sensed her existence, so she directly entered the space. The level 5 zombie leader just glanced in her direction and didn't pay any more attention to her. Instead, it continued to look at Xiedong. It wanted the energy core of this human, and this human's flesh was also delicious. It had been watching them for a few days, and this time it finally made a move and forced these humans here. It was originally prepared to make a move yesterday, but a large group of humans suddenly appeared. Moreover, there were metahumans who were stronger than it, so it did not dare to make a move. That was why it endured until now. Fortunately, the two humans who were stronger than it did not notice it. At this time, Xiedong was thinking of a way to break through the encirclement of this zombie group. He was a little confused at this time. Even if a zombie group suddenly appeared, there were still two intelligent zombies. Even if he killed these two intelligent zombies, there was still a zombie leader. What should he do to escape from the other party's attack? Xiedong only had a fire ability. He could not fly or burrow underground. Even if his ability was exhausted, he still had his martial arts. He could still use his fists and feet to deal with two intelligent zombies without abilities. But against the zombie leader that only had an ability and could control other zombies, he was powerless. At this moment, the zombie leader seemed to be getting impatient. It growled at the two intelligent zombies beside it. Roar dash, the two intelligent zombies immediately jumped out from its side and ran straight at Xiedong. They moved extremely fast. Their bodies nimbly rushed out of the zombie group, and then jumped up, directly jumping on the heads of the ordinary zombies that were densely packed together, stepping on their heads and rushing towards Xiedong. Xiedong was shocked when he saw these two finally making a move. It seemed that the zombie leader did not want to wait any longer. The two intelligent zombies didn't seem to be afraid of his flames. They fiercely pounced towards Xiedong. Xiedong hurriedly threw two fireballs at the two intelligent zombies. However, the two intelligent zombies dodged Xiedong's fireball with great agility. At the same time, they appeared in front of Xiedong, flashing their sharp claws towards Xiedong, who was wrapped in a thin layer of flames. Because Xiedong had used some of his energy to condense the fireball, the flames on his body had already weakened a lot. If he was directly grabbed by the intelligent zombie, the other party's sharp claws would directly crush his flames. At this moment, the zombie leader still felt that it wasn't enough. It suddenly stretched out its hand and opened its fingers into a claw shape. He waved his hand at Xiedong. A chill surged in the surroundings, followed by hailstones falling from the sky. It smashed into Xiedong. When these hailstones hit Xiedong's body, they were melted by the flames on his body. But at the same time, it also sucked away the fire in his body. Moreover, the surrounding temperature dropped, unexpectedly suppressing the fire on Xiedong's body. Xiedong's chest tightened, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. But before he could react, the two intelligent zombies had already grabbed him. He quickly rolled on the ground, and then, ignoring the scratches on his body, he dashed forward. He forcefully smashed an opening in the group of zombies and rushed out. There was a building there which happened to be a big supermarket. There should be a warehouse inside so he could temporarily hide in it. Even if he died, he didn't want to become food in the mouths of the zombies. He also didn't want the level 5 zombie to take out his energy crystal and absorb its energy. While Xiedong ran, he looked at the level 5 zombie leader. The two intelligent zombies behind him, after failing to pounce on him, immediately turned around and quickly chased after him. When the two of them were behind him, Xiedong fiercely threw 2 fireballs at them. Then he used both hands to take down the rifle that was always on his back. He fired 2 shots at the 2 intelligent zombies. Bang, 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 he raised the rifle, and the bullets hit the zombies beside him quickly and accurately. 1 shot to the head, incomparably accurate. When the intelligent zombies were hit by the fireballs, they were stunned for a moment. When they reacted, Xiedong's bullets had already hit their heads. No matter what, he used to be an elite soldier. If it wasn't for the fear of the level 5 zombie, he wouldn't have left it to the end. But now that his ability had been used up, he could only take out his last resort. The level 5 zombie saw that its 2 subordinates were killed, and Xiedong also rushed out of the group of zombies. Finally moved again. As soon as Xiedong saw the level 5 zombie move, he immediately fired 2 shots at its position. Then he quickly ran into the building, his figure nimbly running in the direction of the warehouse. The speed of the level 5 zombie wasn't something that a human could accurately see, so Xiedong fired 2 shots at it. It was simply impossible to hit the zombie leader. It turned into a beast-like shadow, and in a flash it rushed towards the building in front of Xiedong. Seeing Xiedong's figure running into the building, his speed was very slow in the eyes of the zombie leader, so it wasn't in a hurry to directly pounce on Xiedong and bite him to death. Instead, it was like a cat playing with a mouse. It fiercely rushed in front of Xiedong, blocking his way. When Xiedong saw it blocking in front of him, he calmly raised his gun and shot at it. However, its body just flashed like a spider crawling on the wall. It wasn't afraid of its bullets at all. When they were fighting, they didn't notice that a transparent shadow suddenly flashed around them. Then the shadow suddenly jumped to Xiedong's side and grabbed his arm. Then Xiedong disappeared from where he stood. The zombie leader's figure paused, and his expression froze for a moment. Then he blinked his eyes with a dumbfounded face, and then reacted. He angrily opened his mouth and roared, "Roar dash!" It fiercely jumped to the place where Xiedong disappeared, and anxiously circled around. But it still didn't smell Xiedong's breath. Only the smell that he left behind. Roar, roar, roar dash. The zombie leader didn't expect that the meat that was about to be in its mouth would disappear just like that. It angrily jumped around in the same place, and directly used its head to hit here and there, digging a lot of holes in the wall. The aura of its body also rose up in anger, causing the surrounding temperature to drop sharply. A layer of transparent white ice quickly formed on the mourning face on the ground. At this moment, if the zombie was a person, it would definitely curse like this. "Fuck. Where's my meat? Who the fuck stole my meat?" But it couldn't speak, so it didn't have human thoughts. It was just that its instinctive wildness and intelligence made it unable to understand what had happened. Wuwadash, the zombie leader, finally calmed down after tossing and turning for a while. However, it still let out a low roar from its throat, and its voice was extremely stuffy and puzzled. It just couldn't figure out why this human had disappeared. It had clearly observed for a long time and confirmed that this human didn't have the ability to use space. If he did, why didn't he use it earlier? Why wait until now? But he had already disappeared. Chapter 35. Xiedong was shooting at the level 5 zombie that was crawling all over the wall, when he suddenly felt his vision blur. Then the scene in front of him changed drastically. The wall of the broken building was gone. The level 5 zombie was gone. What the hell were these grass in this lake? Before he could figure out what was going on in front of him, he suddenly turned around vigilantly and pointed his gun at the figure standing not far from him. Zombie. Xiedong was stunned for a moment and then subconsciously fired at the zombie. Bang dash. Lin Xiao only slightly shook the bullet that was shot at her and grabbed it with her hand. The bullet was caught in her palm. The trajectory of the bullet was very slow in her eyes, so she didn't even need to look and easily caught it. Xiedong. She actually caught his bullet. This zombie was very strong. However, he couldn't tell what level it was. Xiaodong's heart sank when he saw Lin Xiao easily catch his bullet. Looking at this strange environment, he guessed that this was a space zombie. Before he could confirm the fact, he saw the zombie opposite him throw the bullet at him with a look of disgust. Xiaodong, who was lightly hit in the head by the bullet, was speechless. What did this zombie mean by looking at him with disgust and disdain? Since when did zombies have such a human-like expression? Wasn't this a little too similar? Although Xiaodong was confused by Lin Xiao's action and looked at her, he didn't let his guard down. He tensed up and stared at Lin Xiao with his gun raised. Then he saw the zombie make a strange gesture. After seeing this gesture, Xiaodong was dumbfounded again. The other party's gesture told him, "Pause, the situation has changed." It wasn't important that he could understand the zombie's meaning. What was important was that the zombie's gesture was the code word gesture in the Special Forces training camp. Even ordinary soldiers might not know the code word gesture. How could a zombie know it? Could it be that this zombie was a Special Forces soldier before she died? Could it be that when she died and became a zombie, she still had her memories of her life? But that was impossible. The infection of the virus would first infect the brain. The nerves in the brain were basically eroded, so they became zombies. They were completely unconscious and only had the instinct to eat human flesh. Even if he leveled up, he wouldn't recover his previous memories. Just as Xiaodong was sizing up Lin Xiao, a stone suddenly flew toward him. It hit Xiaodong's body. Then a small figure suddenly ran in front of Lin Xiao and stood in front of her with open arms. She stared at Xiaodong warily. Xiaodong was speechless. Was he seeing things? Why did he see Leader Wu's precious daughter here? Wu Yueling saw a stranger appear. But this stranger pointed a gun at the zombies. She panicked. She knew that this was a gun, and that this gun could explode a zombie's head. She couldn't let this person smash the zombie's head. Xiaodong stared at Wu Yueling blankly and asked, Come here." Suddenly, he anxiously wanted to call Wu Yueling over, because he just realized that there was a man-eating zombie standing behind this child. But before he could finish, he suddenly felt dizzy and almost knelt down. Xiaodong looked at the wound on his body that was scratched by the zombie. He knew that the virus in his body had started to act up. He had been highly focused before, but the appearance of the little girl had disrupted his concentration. As soon as he relaxed, his body immediately reacted to the virus. Xiaodong reluctantly pointed the gun at Lin Xiao and said to Wu Yueling, You come here. That's a zombie. It will eat you." He didn't have the time to think about why this zombie knew the hand signals and code words that only the Special Forces knew. He just wanted the child to leave that dangerous zombie. Although he didn't know why this child was in this zombie's space, but it didn't eat her. There were too many questions and Xiaodong didn't have time to think about it. Who knew that after Wu Yueling heard his words, she would shake her head? She still stood in front of the zombie and didn't move. Lin Xiao looked at Xiaodong's expression and her eyes flashed. She knew that the virus in his body was acting up. When she saw Xiaodong rush out of the zombie crowd, Lin Xiao knew that it was too late to save him. But she didn't have a choice. She couldn't brazenly go out and fight with that level 5 zombie for food, because she felt that she couldn't beat the level 5 zombie leader. At that time she was also very anxious, thinking about how to hide her body, in the case of not alarming the zombie leader. She saved Xiaodong. Then she suddenly entered a very strange state. At that time she only felt dizzy as if she was about to fall asleep, and then she saw some blurred images. That feeling, it was like a dream but also like a fantasy. Then when she woke up again, she saw a bullet piercing through the air and flying towards her. Fortunately, her eyes were different from ordinary people. She could clearly see the trajectory of the bullet, and she felt that the speed of the bullet wasn't fast. By the time she reacted, her hand had already caught the bullet faster than her brain could react. She actually shot her with a bullet. Lin Xiao was a little angry at that time, and then she returned the bullet in disgust. Then she made a hand signal that only the Special Forces knew to him. From Xiaodong's previous battle, she could tell that Xiaodong was a mixed Special Forces soldier at a glance. So she gestured for him to stop for the time being. He just didn't expect Xiao Budian to run out at this time. He even stood in front of her, looking like he wanted to protect her. Lin Xiao was a little surprised. She really didn't expect this. This little guy was afraid that he would be in danger. Although he was small, his courage was not small. Did he run out to block her just because he didn't want her to die? Was she not afraid of death? Lin Xiao felt a little gratified. At least this child had thought of protecting her. He actually thought of protecting her. Who would want to protect a zombie? She gently stretched out her hand and held Wu Yueling's small arm. Then she walked out from behind Wu Yueling and turned her body slightly to block her. Because Lin Xiao could see that Xiedong was in the midst of turning into a corpse. Ugh! At this moment Xiedong was struck by an intense and terrifying pain in his brain. He instantly abandoned his concern for Wu Yueling's safety because he couldn't care about himself anymore. The intense pain in his head made him bend over, and the rifle fell from his hand. For a former soldier, a gun was his life. Even the gun had fallen. It could only be said that Xiedong was in so much pain that he couldn't maintain his consciousness. He clutched his head tightly with both hands and pressed down hard on his head. His body bent down and fell to the ground. His entire body twitched and curled into a ball. Chapter 36. Looking at Xiedong's expression, Wu Yueling was puzzled. She blankly watched him curl into a ball on the ground, and then looked up at Lin Xiao in confusion. His eyes were filled with curiosity and question marks. Lin Xiao pointed at Xiedong, then at himself. Then he flicked his fingernails in the air, making a move that only zombies would do. Wu Yueling immediately understood what Lin Xiao meant. She retreated slightly and hid behind Lin Xiao. Only half of its head and a pair of eyes could be seen. Is that person going to turn into a zombie? Would he also become a man-eater? Wu Yueling thought to herself. Suddenly she felt scared again. Lin Xiao looked at Wu Yueling's rabbit-like eyes and felt speechless. The mind of a child was really hard to understand. Just now he was standing in front of her fearlessly, but now he was hiding behind her in fear. At this moment Xiedong's face was twisted as he screamed in pain. His voice was very painful and miserable, but now no one could stop him from turning into a corpse. He yelled in pain while gritting his teeth. However, he was unable to squeeze these 3 words out of his mouth. Fortunately, he had finished speaking. He didn't know if the zombies could understand him, and he didn't know if Wu Yueling could hear him. At this moment, he just subconsciously wanted to die quickly, and didn't want to endure this kind of pain anymore. After Xiedong shouted, his expression became even more ferocious. His body was no longer curled up into a ball and twitching. Instead, he suddenly sprang up and began to struggle and roll on the ground. He rolled around on the ground crazily, twisting his body into some abnormal angles. Lin Xiao pushed Wu Yueling back a few steps, her eyes fixed on the man who was turning into a zombie. The veins on Xiedong's face were bulging, and his mouth was wide open. A mouthful of white teeth was exposed, looking very frightening. But at this moment there was still a little bit of emotion in his eyes. It was a plea. He looked at Lin Xiao pleadingly. At this time he already felt that this zombie would not harm people, or else it would not have saved him from the mouth of the level 5 zombie leader. And Wu Yueling wouldn't be standing with her like this without any reason. His last thought was that this zombie could kill him. Lin Xiao looked at Xiedong, whose eyes were so wide that they almost popped out of their sockets. The whites of his eyes started to roll, and his eyeballs started to turn gray. She flicked her sharp claws and rushed out from Wu Yueling's front. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of Xiedong, who had already been twisted into a strange shape, and was ready to stab its claws into his skull. But at this moment, something unexpected happened. Xiedong, who had been rolling on the ground, suddenly had a flash in his eyes. Then, his body jerked violently and his head tilted to the side. He actually dodged Lin Xiao's claws, and then his body crawled on the ground like a spider. Using both his hands and feet to prop himself up, he quickly crawled towards the lake. He arrived at the lakeside in no time. With a bounce of his 4 legs, he leaped onto the lakeside. Plop! He actually jumped into the lake by himself. Lin Xiao stood there dumbfounded, still maintaining the posture of stretching out her claws. She looked at the zombie that Xiedong had turned into. In the blink of an eye, he dodged her attack and jumped into the lake. Lin Xiao immediately rushed to the lakeside and looked at the ripples on the surface of the lake. All the zombies were gone. To be honest, Lin Xiao had never gone into the middle of the lake. She had always been bathing by the lakeside, and she hadn't had the time to go down to the middle of the lake. She didn't know how deep it was and she didn't know what was inside. Now she let a newborn zombie go down first. And the zombie that Xiedong had turned into was also very strange. It was obviously not an ordinary zombie. It looked like it had directly entered the level 1 or 2 stage. Otherwise it wouldn't have moved so quickly and reacted so quickly. Lin Xiao stood by the lakeside frowning. This was not good. He let a low-level zombie hide in his space. If there was no one in the space it would be fine, but the problem was that there was a child here. But she didn't dare to go down to find that zombie. She was afraid that she would go down. It would be troublesome if that thing climbed up from the other side. Lin Xiao felt that she couldn't completely control this space. If she could feel the situation under the lake, it would be better. Because she could only sense the space above the lake, she couldn't sense anything under the lake. Now she could only temporarily guard the space and wait for Xiedong to come out, because she couldn't let Wu Yueling out of the space. There were zombies outside, it wasn't safer than this one. She returned to Wu Yueling's side, and pointed to the place where the furniture was. She told her to stay there. Wu Yueling also stared at the water curiously. She didn't know what happened to the person who had turned into a zombie in the water. Would he drown? Or could he swim like a fish? Seeing Lin Xiao's gesture, she knew that she couldn't stay here. She didn't dare. So when Lin Xiao raised her hand and pointed to the place where the bed and sofa were, she immediately turned around and walked over there. She also had to make sure that Lin Xiao was also by her side. Lin Xiao followed behind her, looking back at the gradually calming lake as she walked. But just when she thought that Xiedong would stay under the lake for a long time, Lin Xiao followed Wu Yueling for a few steps. Suddenly her ears twitched and she stopped. Lin Xiao stopped and turned around to stare at the surface of the lake without blinking. Sure enough, the surface of the lake that was slowly calming down began to surge again. At this moment, the water began to churn slightly again, as if something was about to emerge from the water. In fact, something did come out. It was the Xiedong zombie that had jumped in not long ago. There was a ripple in the water, and then a figure quietly floated up. It floated motionlessly on the water surface. Lin Xiao. Ooh? What was going on? Feeling that Lin Xiao stopped behind her, Wu Yueling also stopped. Her senses were very sharp, so Lin Xiao didn't follow behind her. She immediately felt it. She turned around and looked at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao's eyes were staring straight at the lake. Wu Yueling curiously leaned over and stood behind Lin Xiao's legs. She also stuck out her head and looked at the lake. Only then did she see the motionless figure floating on the water surface. Lin Xiao frowned. She didn't know what was going on. Why did Xiedong become like this after entering the water after turning into a zombie? But she remembered that when she first entered the water, she seemed to have fallen asleep for a long time before waking up. She didn't know if Xiedong's situation was the same as hers. Lin Xiao thought for a moment. Since this guy had already floated up by himself, then of course she had to go over and take a look. This guy was already in a state where he couldn't move. Then she could just touch him and send him out of the space. Chapter 37. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao immediately turned around and squatted down to look at Wu Yueling. He pointed a finger at her, then at the furniture. Then she told her to go over. Lin Xiao then pointed at herself, then at Xiedong who had turned into a zombie on the surface of the lake. Then she pointed at the sky. In any case, it was just a series of gestures, wanting Wu Yueling to go over and stay there by herself, not to run around. Then she went to clean up the thing on the surface of the water and shut it out of the space. Wu Yueling looked at her silently for a while. She didn't know if she understood or didn't understand. She didn't go to the place with the bed, but stood in front of Lin Xiao and looked at her eyes. Lin Xiao. At this moment, she could no longer sense Wu Yueling's thoughts. After this child's emotions calmed down, once this child calmed down, Lin Xiao could rarely sense what she was thinking. Seeing that Wu Yueling was only looking at her, Lin Xiao looked back at Xiedong who was still floating on the surface of the water. She stood up, put her hands on the little one's shoulders, and pushed her back to face the direction of the bed. Then she pushed her a few steps. Wu Yueling then walked forward. But she would look back at Lin Xiao after every 2 steps. Then she continued to walk. Lin Xiao saw that she finally walked forward. Then she turned back to the surface of the lake. She carefully stared at Xiedong's body and sniffed him. Xiedong was floating with his back facing up, so she couldn't see his face. But Lin Xiao sensed that his breath and smell had changed. It wasn't the original human smell, and it wasn't the smell before he suddenly turned into a zombie and jumped into the water. She felt that Xiedong's breath was a bit strange. The human smell was gone and the zombie smell was also very weak. Lin Xiao couldn't tell what kind of ghost Xiedong was now. Lin Xiao stretched her feet into the water and slowly moved towards Xiedong. Xiedong's position wasn't very far from the shore, about 6 or 7 meters away. Lin Xiao had never been so far into the lake, so she was a bit cautious. When she was 3 meters away from the shore, the water was already up to her chest. She immediately kicked her legs and swam over. This was faster than walking in the water. When she swam to Xiedong's side, she didn't see any changes. Lin Xiao thought about it and suddenly felt a little silly. She didn't know when she became so timid she was a zombie anyway. How could he be afraid of being bitten by this fellow? Not to mention with his current strength it was impossible for him to do so. Even if he wanted to, he might not be able to bite himself. When he thought of that, Lin Xiao immediately extended his hand towards Xiedong without fear. She flipped him over and grabbed him by the collar behind his neck with one hand. Then she dragged him to the shore. When they swam ashore, Lin Xiao dragged Xiedong up and casually threw him onto the empty ground on the shore. Only then did she see his face clearly. His face, which was twisted and full of veins, had now returned to normal. It was just that his face was a little pale and green, like the skin color of a normal zombie. Those whose mouths weren't cracked and their noses weren't crooked had their eyes closed. He looked like a normal dead person, and there was no sign of him turning into a zombie. Lin Xiao crouched down beside Xiedong and stared at his face. Then he silently said, "He looks average. 5 points." Then she reached out her hands and pinched Xiedong's teeth. Xiedong opened his mouth, revealing his teeth. Sure enough, a row of flat teeth had become sharp at this time. Lin Xiao sniffed and realized that Xiedong's mouth didn't have the stench that a zombie should have. Letting go of his teeth, Lin Xiao looked at Xiedong's hands. His fingernails hadn't grown out yet, but the bones of his fingers had already changed. They were curved like hooks. She looked at Xiedong's wounds, which were originally festering. Now there was a faint dark green color, which was obviously a virus reaction. He had indeed turned into a zombie. Looking at it, she realized that Xiedong had indeed turned into a zombie. Lin Xiao thought about how to get rid of him. Should she throw him out? He might become a zombie but not get shot in the head by a human. He might be torn apart by other high-level zombies. Or he might wander around and finally evolve into a high-level zombie. Then he would be killed by someone. Or should she directly stab his head with her claws? Then go out and dig a hole to bury him, so that he could rest in peace? Lin Xiao felt that it was better to bury him. Thinking about it, Lin Xiao closed her eyes and looked outside. Then she realized that this method couldn't be used. Because the level 5 zombie was still guarding in the same place, as if waiting for her to go out. Unless she entered that wandering soul state again, she couldn't leave with the space. Lin Xiao tried hard to think about the feeling when she entered that strange state. She remembered that at that time because she had been staring at the situation outside with her eyes closed, and then she was highly concentrated on thinking about how to sneak in and save Xiedong. Then she inexplicably entered that wandering soul state of half asleep and half awake. Lin Xiao still remembered that the first time she had a dream, so she ran with the space to the strawberry field in the space. But why did she have to have a dream? If she didn't have a dream, why did she have to be in that wandering soul state? Couldn't she just do it with a clear mind? Why was this space so difficult to deal with? Lin Xiao felt that she needed to slowly study the function of this space. But now how could she throw Xiedong out? The zombie leader outside was guarding like a tiger watching its prey. Maybe as soon as she appeared, it would rush out. Lin Xiao was in a dilemma. She found that she could throw dead things out like this or throw them in from the outside. But she couldn't throw people or zombies. She could only bring them out and in together. Just when Lin Xiao was squatting beside Xiedong, Xiedong's tranquil breath suddenly surged. Lin Xiao immediately stood up and took a few steps back. Then she saw Xiaodong, who was lying on the ground, move his eyelids and open his eyes. They were not grayish-white eyes, nor were they pitch-black eyes like Lin Xiao's that had no sclera. They were a pair of normal eyes, black pupils and normal sclera. But the pupils were different from normal people's eyes. They weren't a little round in the middle but firm. These didn't matter, the important thing was that after this guy opened his eyes, he looked at the gray sky and Lin Xiao's eyes with a blank face, and then blinked his eyes. Suddenly, he sat up and stared at Lin Xiao vigilantly. Lin Xiao was speechless. What the fuck is going on now? Why was this zombie staring at her with a vigilant face? Before she could figure it out, Xiaodong's expression changed again. His eyes flashed a few times and actually calmed down slowly. The vigilance in his eyes also disappeared. Lin Xiao looked at this zombie with a confused expression. Didn't look like it. Human. Didn't look like it either. What did this guy turn into? Just when Lin Xiao was guessing what he had turned into, Xiaodong moved his mouth. Lin Xiao was speechless. Forgive her for not hearing what he said at all. But she could sense his thoughts. Xiaodong said, so hungry. Chapter 38. Looking at a tall and strong man shouting at him that he was hungry with a blank face, Lin Xiao expressed that he couldn't accept it. Not to mention Lin Xiao himself, even Xiaodong was stunned after he shouted that he was hungry. He lowered his eyes and touched his throat, feeling a little strange. Both of his eyes were filled with confusion. Then he narrowed his eyes as if he was thinking hard about something. Lin Xiao stood on the side and looked at Xiaodong's reaction strangely. Too strange. Too strange. Not to mention the time needed for the virus to infect. It would take at least 12 hours for him to turn into a zombie. But it took less than half an hour for this guy to be infected by the virus and turn into a zombie. That was too fast. Even if the zombie virus was strengthened, causing the outbreak to be rapid and speeding up the zombification process. But why did this guy still maintain his original appearance after turning into a zombie? Because other zombies either had faces full of blue veins or black blood vessels, or their faces were distorted and their mouths were open. Anyway, they were going to become different. Just like Lin Xiao now. So when Wu Chonghua saw Lin Xiao who had turned into a zombie, he didn't recognize that this woman was Lu Tianyu, who had threatened him with her daughter and forced him to do that kind of dirty thing. Otherwise, a lightning bolt would have turned her into ashes. But at this time Xiaodong's face was still intact. The blue veins had disappeared, and there were no black blood vessels on his face. Apart from his pale face, there was nothing strange. Even his eyes didn't change much. Unless one stared at his eyes carefully, one wouldn't notice the change in his pupils, because the color of his eyes didn't change. At this moment Xiaodong, who was originally trying hard to think about something, suddenly changed his expression. Suddenly, his expression changed and his eyes shone with disbelief. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Lin Xiao, then quickly turned over from the ground and got up. He looked around and quickly fixed his eyes on Wu Yueling, who was sitting on the bed in the distance. At this time Wu Yueling was also looking at him curiously from a distance. Seeing that Wu Yueling was fine, Xiaodong breathed a sigh of relief. He turned around to look at Lin Xiao and saw that Lin Xiao was only standing at a relatively safe distance. He then lowered his head to observe his own situation. Then, Xiaodong's expression was dumbfounded. He stared at himself with a look that said, "This is not real." His hands pinched here and there. Lin Xiao stared at him for a long time and saw his series of reactions. A thought emerged in his mind. She calmly growled at him, "Roar. Do you still remember who you are?" Lin Xiao's voice conveyed such a message. Then she saw Xiaodong's expression stiffen for a moment. Then he raised his head and stared at her. His eyes were filled with uncertainty, bewilderment, and disbelief. All sorts of emotions were mixed together. Gulp. He opened his mouth, but a string of strange sounds came out. Only then did Xiaodong realize something. He immediately shut his mouth. But Lin Xiao still understood his voice. "I'm Xiaodong." Lin Xiao looked at him. So this person was called Xiaodong. But from the looks of it, his memories from when he was alive did not disappear. He actually remembered who he was. "Roar. Do you still remember how you died?" Lin Xiao continued to yell at him. although the way she spoke was a little strange. But she felt that if she didn't say anything, Xiaodong, who was also a zombie, wouldn't know what she wanted to say. Xiaodong froze for a moment, then his eyes narrowed. Then a strong hatred leaked out. As he became emotional, his entire face became a little twisted. His mouth opened up, revealing a mouthful of sharp white teeth. His eyebrows raised. A fierce killing intent flashed in his eyes. Roar so ugly. Lin Xiao looked at his appearance and roared with some disgust. Xiaodong's expression stiffened again. Then he realized that he was too emotional. Then, he put away his expression and looked at Lin Xiao with a face of confusion. He really didn't lose his memories. He remembered everything from when he was alive. He also remembered how he died. But when he was infected and turned into a zombie, his memories were a little fuzzy. He didn't know what happened. But now he was dead and turned into a zombie. He was still aware of this. He had no body temperature, no heartbeat, and his whole body was stiff and sluggish. His skin was blue and he couldn't speak. But he could understand the roar of another zombie. All these signs told him that he was no longer a human. And Xiaodong sniffed in Wu Yueling's direction. So fragrant. So hungry. So hungry. Just as he stared in Wu Yueling's direction, a figure flashed in front of him and blocked his line of sight. Roar dash, are you going to eat me? Lin Xiao stared at him with cold eyes. In case this guy couldn't control his zombie instincts and pounced towards Wu Yueling's fragrance, then it wouldn't be fun. Hearing Lin Xiao's low warning roar, Xiaodong was shocked. Only now did he know what happened to him. He smelled Wu Yueling's scent and felt it was very fragrant. An instinctive hunger in his body almost took control of his mind, because he had an urge to follow the scent and pounce over. If this female zombie didn't speak up in time, he probably wouldn't know what he was going to do. And he felt that this female zombie's scent had an absolute suppression on him. He couldn't resist her at all. He was even afraid of the scent on her body, although this zombie was acting very kind right now. Looking at the other's completely black eyes, Xiaodong didn't know what level this zombie was now, but it must be above level 4. And the thought she just sent out didn't seem like something a zombie would ask. No wonder she was able to stay together with Leader Wu's daughter. So this zombie was special? Was she the same as him and also had memories from when she was alive? And she might even be a special forces soldier. Xiaodong thought too much. The emotions in his eyes were revealed. And after he became a zombie, Lin Xiao knew his thoughts even more clearly. Roar. I have memories. I was indeed a special forces soldier when I was alive. Xiaodong, who had been nagged at, found it hard to accept. Roar dash, you know what I'm thinking? He was a little scared, okay? This female zombie could actually know what he was thinking. Xiaodong's eyes were wide open. His face had a confused expression of what just happened. Staring blankly at Lin Xiao, Lin Xiao glanced at him and nodded his head lightly. Then she said to him, Roar dash, we can't go out now. Suddenly she felt that the conversation between the two of them was really strange. The two of them were roaring like this, but they couldn't talk normally. So strange. This feeling is so annoying. My heart is so tired. At this moment, Lin Xiao's eyes flashed and she suddenly saw the pen in Xiaodong's camouflage pocket. Her eyes lit up and she immediately pointed at his pocket. Chapter 39. Xiaodong lowered his head and saw a pen stuck to the side of his soaked shirt pocket. He froze for a moment and immediately understood what Lin Xiao meant. He took out a pen with his hand and took out the little notepad that was inside it. It was just that the papers were wet and stuck together. Lin Xiao looked at the wet notebook and roared at him, Roar. Your superpower? She knew that Xiaodong had a fire superpower, but she didn't know that he had become a zombie. Was his superpower still there? Xiaodong immediately understood what Lin Xiao meant. At the same time he remembered. He still didn't know what his superpower was like. Lin Xiao's reminder reminded him of it. He raised his hand slightly and opened his palm. Lin Xiao saw him raise his hand and close his eyes as if he was sensing something. She looked at him curiously. Puff, he didn't see any red flames, only a spark that exploded in his palm. Then it turned into a wisp of green smoke that floated up and then dissipated. Lin Xiao and Xiaodong were speechless. The situation didn't look too bad. At least there was a spark. which meant that his superpower hadn't completely disappeared. But after the smoke disappeared from Xiaodong's hand, Xiaodong's sharp fingernails turned fiery red. Then the fiery red color disappeared. However, the clothes on his body quickly dried at this moment. They were dried by his body heat. He was cold just now, but now his whole body was boiling hot. But he didn't feel uncomfortable. Lin Xiao walked a few steps to his side and took the cup of paper from his other hand. Then, she placed her hand on his smoking palm and raised her hand towards him. She signaled for him to try again. Xiaodong hesitated. He couldn't control the heat in his body, and he couldn't release the fire, so he didn't know if it would work. Lin Xiao sensed his hesitation and impatiently roared at him, "Wu, hurry up!" Xiaodong couldn't resist her command, so he immediately tried to concentrate the heat in his body on his hand. However, in less than 2 seconds, Lin Xiao suddenly reached out and snatched the notebook from his hand. Then there was a puff sound and another wisp of smoke floated. At this time, the notebook in Lin Xiao's hands was completely dry. If it wasn't for her sharp eyes and quick movements, she would have been killed. Perhaps the paper was about to burn on his palm. Xiaodong looked at his hand gloomily. Xiaodong, who was used to having powerful abilities, couldn't believe that his ability had become like this. He expressed that he could not accept this situation. Lin Xiao did not care about his current mood. She took the pen that was also soaked in water and drew on the paper. After testing that the pen was still usable, he immediately wrote down a few sentences. He showed it to Xiaodong. "My name is Lin Xiao, you are now in my space. The zombie leader was guarding outside. We can't go out for a while. Is there anything you want to do?" Xiaodong was staring at his hands in a daze. He only reacted when Lin Xiao stuffed a piece of paper into his hands. He looked at Lin Xiao's words. The strokes were sharp and unyielding. There seemed to be 1 or 2 sword-like strokes in every word. Killing intent flashed in Xiaodong's eyes. He wanted to kill those who had betrayed him. Lin Xiao sensed his thoughts and wrote another sentence. "If you want to kill, go out. You look no different from a human now anyway. As long as you don't speak, no one will know that you are dead. I guess the level 5 zombie outside isn't interested in your meat anymore." Xiaodong looked at the last sentence and felt a pain in his balls. Without waiting for him to react, Lin Xiao wrote another sentence. "Of course, I don't know if it will get angry and kill you for its core as a snack. Xiaodong." At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly pressed a hand on his shoulder, and the two of them flashed. Their figures flashed and disappeared from the space. Then the next second, Lin Xiao appeared in the same place again. Xiaodong was missing, and at this time he found that Xiaodong was in a different place, alone in the wind. Shit! He was thrown out by that female zombie. And then he was left here alone, to face a terrifying level 5 zombie. Seeing a familiar red-eyed zombie not far away, Xiaodong couldn't help but want to turn around and bite Lin Xiao. What the hell was the meaning of throwing him out alone? Was he going to feed the zombie leader? She didn't want to eat him. She was going to throw him out and let him be tortured. Even if he wanted to come out and find those bastards for revenge, he definitely didn't want to come out now. Looking at the zombie leader that was already flying towards him, Xiaodong began to roar in his heart. At this time, the zombie leader that was rushing over stopped not far away from Xiaodong. It stared at him with a puzzled expression, its pair of eyes flashing with evil red light. As soon as the zombie leader approached, Xiaodong was immediately terrified. He took a few steps back, but he didn't dare to turn around and run. Because the other party's aura was too strong, suppressing him. It was even more terrifying than Lin Xiao. He couldn't even think of resisting or running away. This was the aura restriction of a high-level zombie on a low-level zombie. If Xiaodong knew that he was thrown out by Lin Xiao as a bait, he was probably going to bite Lin Xiao. At this time, Lin Xiao was squatting by the lake. She closed her eyes and looked at the situation outside. Seeing that the zombie leader stopped not far away from Xiaodong, she let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that the zombie leader had smelled her aura just now, so it rushed out. But after seeing that it was Xiaodong, it realized that Xiaodong didn't have the sweet taste of a human. Instead, he was the same kind as it. Only then did it stop in confusion, and even its aggressiveness had decreased a lot. It also knew that if a human wasn't eaten in time and was bitten or scratched by them, they would become the same kind after half a day. but this human in front of it seemed to have changed a bit too fast. It was clearly the fragrant smell of human flesh not long ago, but now it had become the smell of the same kind. And its level was very low, so this zombie leader wasn't even interested in his zombie core. The zombie leader slowly walked over and slowly circled around Xiaodong. Although it felt that Xiaodong's aura was a bit strange, it couldn't tell what was going on. But it didn't care about that now. It was looking for that strange aura, the aura that snatched its food. Of course, it didn't know that the person it was looking for was watching its every move with its eyes closed. After circling a few times, it still couldn't find Lin Xiao's figure or aura. The zombie leader suddenly became angry. It fiercely turned around and slapped Xiaodong away with its claw. Bang! Xiaodong didn't even have time to react, and his whole body flew out. He fell to the ground with a bang. Then he heard the zombie leader madly shout a few times. Roar, roar, roar. After the zombie finished roaring, it turned around and jumped. Its body jumped very high, and while stepping on the wall of the building, it jumped up. After a few moments, it directly flashed to the roof of a building on the side of the 20th floor and disappeared. Chapter 40. Xiaodong lay on the ground, his limbs flailing a few times. He couldn't get up for a long time, so he just lay on the ground. From the looks of it, the zombie leader no longer had the patience to continue guarding here. After lying on the ground for a while, Xiaodong finally felt that he could control his limbs. Only then did he slowly sit up. Finally, he heaved a sigh of relief. His life was saved. I didn't expect to have to worry about zombies when I was still a human, but now I'm a zombie. He still had to worry about zombies. This post-apocalyptic world is really hard. At this moment, a figure appeared at the place where he was originally standing. Lin Xiao appeared out of thin air. She took the note and walked to Xiaodong's side, showing him what was written on it. Is there a map? Do you have a car? Xiaodong stood up from the ground and looked at her note. He raised his head and looked at her in confusion, but his eyes were questioning her. What do you need a car and a map for? The conversation between Xiaodong and Lin Xiao was a little strange. Any thoughts he had were now just a look at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao had received it, and he wanted to know what Lin Xiao was thinking. He still had to see what she wrote on the paper. Why did he feel like he was at a disadvantage? Lin Xiao glanced at him and directly filtered his current thoughts. He scribbled on the paper again. Head to the southern base. Looking for someone. Xiaodong nodded. He didn't have a map with him right now, but he could borrow it from someone else. He remembered that Huang Xiao and the others had brought a map with them. Moreover, that spatial ability user didn't know what was stored in that space. As for the car, it just so happened that his car was in the hands of those people. He nodded to Lin Xiao. The two of them discussed for a while and decided to settle the scores with the teammates who betrayed Xiaodong. Now that they were zombies, it was much easier to find people. Actually, Lin Xiao had already noticed them when the level 5 zombie leader was chasing after Xiaodong, who had yet to become a zombie. They quietly came out of that person's space and quickly left. Xiaodong didn't notice this at the time because he was dealing with the zombie leader. However, Lin Xiao, who was still paying attention to the situation in the space, saw it and remembered the direction they left in. Seeing Lin Xiao walk towards an alley without hesitation, Xiaodong didn't understand why she was so sure that she was going that way. So he reached out from behind her and patted Lin Xiao's shoulder. Lin Xiao looked back at him. His eyes were filled with doubt. How do you know they're here? Xiaodong also asked her with his eyes. Lin Xiao looked down at the paper and wrote, I saw them heading this way. If you want to find them quickly, shout for me. Cut the crap. After she finished writing, she threw the paper at Xiaodong's chest and gave him a scornful look. She had no choice. She didn't have the whites of her eyes to roll. The despised Xiaodong was speechless. Seeing Lin Xiao continue to walk forward, Xiaodong could only follow her silently. Suddenly he thought of something else, and went forward to pat her on the shoulder. Lin Xiao stopped and turned around. Why couldn't she tell that this man was so sentimental? Xiaodong did not understand Lin Xiao's gaze this time, so he could only use his hand to measure the height of his leg. Then asked her with his eyes, Aren't you going to return Chief Wu's daughter? He was probably going crazy looking for her. Lin Xiao sneered with a strange expression on his face. Go back? She had already planned to abduct Xiao Budian, okay. I won't send it back to that man. It would be even better if he went crazy. How dare he blast her with lightning without knowing what was right or wrong? She wrote on the paper, "Don't worry about this. Anyway, the little girl won't die, and she won't be eaten by me." After she finished writing, she glared at Xiaodong, then turned around and continued walking. Xiaodong did not dare to ask her again this time, because Lin Xiao's last gaze made him feel a sense of pressure as if he was being warned. The two zombies walked along the street as if nothing had happened. The zombies that were swaying around them either ignored them or avoided them because of Lin Xiao's aura. Xiaodong had never walked so calmly in a zombie horde. In the past, he had to be on the edge to guard against the zombies' attacks. But now the zombies had to avoid him when they saw him. This contrast made Xiaodong feel very fresh and awkward. Lin Xiao walked along the road and suddenly stopped at a fork in the road. She raised her nose and sniffed in the air, as if to confirm the direction. Xiaodong saw her like this and also sniffed with his nose, but he did not smell anything. Lin Xiao only sniffed a few times, then pointed to the left. She lifted her foot and walked to the left. She knew that she could smell the scent of humans within a kilometer. Therefore, when Wu Chengwei arrived with his army, she could smell the strong human aura from afar. But she felt that she could smell even further now, but she still needed to confirm it. And the terrain here was blocked by buildings. The scent that she smelled might have been blocked by the obstacles. Lin Xiao led Xiaodong left and right, and then arrived behind a wall. Suddenly, she stopped and stared in front of her. Her hand was behind her back, making a signal to Xiaodong. As soon as Xiaodong saw her signal, his eyes flashed. Lin Xiao meant that the target had appeared and was ready to move. Then he saw Lin Xiao raise her hand and make a few movements, but her body stopped there motionless. When Xiaodong saw her gesture, he immediately knew what she meant and changed his expression. He acted like a normal person, but his eyes were slightly narrowed. Just as he was about to move, Lin Xiao suddenly swung her hand. She threw a black rifle into Xiaodong's hand. This was the gun that he had dropped in her space. Xiaodong caught his gun, and a strange feeling slid through his heart. He had lost his gun and he had lost his life. Now his life was back and so was his gun. However, his life had been saved in a different way. It had only been a few hours, but his life had changed dramatically. His protection of others was in exchange for betrayal. He used all his ability to block the zombies for them, but in the end he was kicked into the zombie horde. He thought he would be torn apart and eaten by the zombies, or his energy crystal core would be dug out. He was saved by the zombies and then he became a zombie. The strange thing was, he became a zombie with his memories but his body didn't change. Xiaodong's mood was a bit complicated. He looked at his hands that were holding the gun and wondered if his claws were also carrying the virus. Lin Xiao saw that he was still in a daze, so she suddenly lifted her foot. She directly kicked him in the butt, kicking him out. After Xiaodong was kicked, his body leaped forward a step, and only then did he react. Then his expression changed, and with a fierce expression, he snuck towards another building not far away. Just now, Lin Xiao's gesture indicated the exact location of the other party, and the people inside did not know at this time. They thought that the person who had died in the mouths of the zombies was already coming towards them with monstrous killing intent. Chapter 41. Brother, shall we trick Xiaodong this time? Next time there won't be anyone to block the zombies for us. At this time the four people hiding in a room in the small building were sitting and talking. Huang Xiao smiled indifferently and said, "What are you afraid of? Without Xiaodong's firewall, did he forget about his tornado? Besides, my ability is about to level up. Without Xiaodong, the captain position will be mine." That's true. Our brother Zhao's strength is not much weaker than Xiaodong. Since Xiaodong was the captain, he always got the best of the rewards. The ones we get are not even enough to fill the gaps between our teeth. That's right, every time the good stuff is taken by him. And that woman in the base, she obviously belongs to our brother Xiao. But he used food to seduce her. Otherwise, she would have long been in our brother Zhao's bed. Speaking of that woman, Xia Zhao's face darkened, and a strong jealousy flashed in his eyes. But he quickly smiled and said with some pride, "She's a woman as long as she has material goods. Isn't it easy to get her into bed?" Besides, this time Xiaodong is already dead. Who will stop me when I go back? So what if she doesn't want to? Doesn't it mean that I can do whatever I want? If I want, I can do it. And at the end of his words, he smiled with a wretched expression. That meaning, as long as it is a man can understand. Haha, that's true. The others looked at each other and laughed. Their laughter carried a certain meaning. But Brother Xiao, this time when you go back to the base, absorb all the zombie cores and energy crystals in your hands. You should be able to break through to level 4. The 4th level of the wind element was much better than the fire element. One wind blade to cut off a zombie's head is much more useful than Xiaodong's fireballs. A level 2 metahuman said flatteringly. Hearing this, Huang Xiao laughed and said proudly in his heart, if it wasn't because of his level 4 firewall that can block a lot of zombies and save us a lot of trouble, I would have killed him long ago. But this time he is here, we can use him to block the zombie leader. Otherwise, we won't even have the time to enter the space. The other 3 nodded with lingering fear in their hearts. When they thought of the zombie leader, their faces turned ugly. Yes, I didn't expect that we would be so unlucky. Others rarely encounter a zombie leader, but we actually encountered one. Unfortunately, this is a zombie leader at full strength, we are no match for it. Otherwise, its corpse core would be enough for us to earn a fortune. Right. Speaking of the zombie leader's corpse core, everyone's eyes revealed a greedy look. Huang Xiao held a bottle of mineral water in his hand and took a sip. It's a pity that we didn't get Xiaodong's energy crystal core. What a great loss. A rank 4 energy crystal core is enough for me to break through to rank 4. None of them realized that outside the door they had closed, there was a figure outside. Xiaodong gritted his teeth as he listened. His eyes bulged, and the veins on both sides of his forehead popped out. He clenched his fists tightly. He had never thought that these people would not just betray him. Huang Xiao actually wanted his energy crystal core, and even coveted his woman. Very good. A bunch of damned ingrates. Huang Xiao and the others felt that it was a pity that they didn't get Xiaodong's energy after tricking him. Bang! Bang! The door was kicked open by someone. The force was so strong that it actually sent the metal door flying in. With a bang it hit the ground. The 4 people in the room instantly jumped up. In the blink of an eye, they all aimed their weapons at the door, but they didn't immediately shoot. Because there was a familiar figure standing at the door. Xiaodong! You didn't die. One of them saw clearly that it was Xiaodong standing at the door, and immediately shouted in shock. Bang! What responded to him was a bullet. That person didn't react and looked at his chest. With a confused face, he looked at his own blood gushing out from the bullet hole in his chest. It seeped into his clothes. Xiaodong closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The aroma of the blood made the hunger in his stomach swell instantly. A voice sounded in his mind. Eat him! Eat him! Eat him! Right at this moment, a blade of air pierced through the air and flew towards him. Xiaodong tilted his head slightly. He didn't even open his eyes and dodged the air blade. Pooh! The air blade cut a deep knife mark on the wall behind him. Xiaodong? Haha! You didn't die? That's great. Originally, I thought it was a pity that your core crystal was taken advantage of by that zombie leader. I didn't think you actually didn't die. That's not the main point. The main point is that you came back to die. Ha ha ha! When Huang Xiao saw Xiaodong, his eyes shot out light. He looked at Xiaodong as if he was looking at a dead object. However, there was a hint of greed in his eyes. He didn't have the slightest bit of guilt or shame. Instead, he looked as if he had let go of everyone and didn't need to pretend to be tired. It was as if they had already shed all pretense of cordiality and met as enemies. Xiaodong tried his best to block out the voice in his mind. He forced himself to ignore the tempting sweet smell. He resisted the hunger and looked at Huang Xiao with a gloomy face. Suddenly, his hand moved. The gun in his hand pointed at another person and fired. Bang! Ugh! Xiaodong! That person didn't expect Xiaodong to be distracted and kill him while glaring at Huang Xiao. The worst thing was that he didn't guard against Xiaodong's move. So before he could dodge, he was already shot in the heart. The location was the same as the first person who was shot. Xiaodong didn't even look at him. He just continued to stare coldly at Huang Xiao. He didn't have much of a reaction to Huang Zhao's arrogant words. Of course, he wouldn't open his mouth to argue with him, because right now he couldn't speak. After Xiedong killed the second person, he pointed the gun at Huang Zhao. Huang Zhao ignored the gun and sneered. As a level 4 ability user, you're holding a gun? Let me guess. Is it because your ability has been depleted? Have you recovered? Haha. You think you can deal with me with a broken gun? He didn't say us. At this time, he had already excluded the other 3 people from his camp. Since 2 of them were already dead, there was still 1 left. He could completely ignore it. As he said that, Huang Zhao raised his hands. A gust of wind blew around him. At this time, the other person who Xiedong didn't shoot was standing on the side. This man who Xiedong didn't kill immediately, originally had no ability. At least in everyone's eyes, he wasn't an ability user. But he disappeared with Huang Zhao and the others. Chapter 42. Xiedong just took a glance at him and determined that he was the spatial ability user. Because thinking about it, he did not notice that Huang Zhao and the others had been protecting him intentionally or unintentionally. And he did not notice it at all, only thinking that they had a good relationship. Now that he thought about it, it was because they already knew that this person had a spatial ability. He retreated to a corner, wanting to avoid the battle between Xiedong and Huang Zhao. But at this moment he seemed to see something flash in the corner of his eyes. He turned his head and saw a figure suddenly flashing in from the window behind Huang Zhao. In an instant it appeared behind Huang Zhao, completely ignoring the wind around him. It directly reached out and stabbed its sharp claws into the back of Huang Zhao's head. The figure nimbly waved its hand, and Huang Zhao did not even have time to make a sound. He was thrown away along with the wind. But half of Huang Zhao's skull was still in the figure's hand. The spatial ability user's eyes widened as he looked at this sudden scene. He also saw what the figure that suddenly jumped in from the window was. It was a female zombie. Just as the other party threw Huang Zhao away, the spatial ability user almost reflexively raised his gun and fired at it. But the other party just grabbed it with one hand, and the bullet was caught in its palm. The spatial ability user was a little dumbfounded. Before he could react, the zombie moved again. In a flash it disappeared. But in the next second it appeared beside him, and a claw grabbed his arm. The spatial ability user felt his whole body flying, and then his vision blurred. When he came back to his senses, the scene in front of him had changed. He appeared at the edge of a small lake. Then he felt his arm loosen, and only then did he notice that there was a zombie beside him. The spatial ability user subconsciously retreated and raised his gun. Before he could pull the trigger, a hand suddenly grabbed his gun, and then he felt the hand holding the gun shake. His hand was empty and the gun was gone. He immediately turned his head to look at the hand next to him, and saw Xiedong standing a meter away from him. He was twirling his pistol in his hand. "Xiedong, what are you doing? Why did you snatch my gun instead of dealing with this zombie?" The space ability user was enraged when he saw that it was Xiedong who snatched his gun. Even if they had internal conflicts, but in front of the zombies, everyone had to deal with the zombies first. After that, he would solve the internal problems. This was a law that had gradually formed after the apocalypse. Of course, if it was Huang Zhao who sent his comrades to the zombies, then it could only be said that this kind of behavior was the darkest and most common thing in the post-apocalyptic world. Of course, this was an exception. It was just that this spatial ability user had yet to recognize his identity. Now that they were in danger, they subconsciously wanted Xiedong's protection, just like before. However, he had forgotten that he had just betrayed Xiedong not long ago, and had joined forces with others to push Xiedong into the zombie horde. When Xiedong heard his words, his lips curled into a sneer. Sneering, he stood still and looked at him. When the space ability user saw Xiedong's mocking smile, he realized that he had betrayed Xiedong before. He was stunned for a moment. Now there was no one to protect him. He was just a spatial ability user, and before the apocalypse he was just an ordinary company employee, so his combat power was not high. After the apocalypse, he had to rely on the protection of others to survive. Fortunately, he had activated the very useful spatial ability later on. Only then did he obtain the protection of Huang Zhao and the others. Now Huang Zhao is dead just a few seconds ago. At this moment he had fallen into a situation where there was no one to protect him. At this time Lin Xiao threw a crystal in her hand towards Xiaodong. When Xiaodong caught it, her figure flashed and appeared in front of the space ability user. She grabbed the opponent's throat. Ugh. Ugh. Blarg. The breath in his throat was instantly stuck, and the space ability user immediately recovered. But when he saw a pair of pitch-black eyes staring at him, he immediately trembled in fear, and even forgot to struggle. Unable to breathe, his face was red, and his eyes were filled with fear and despair as he looked at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao stared at his eyes, and could clearly feel his inner thoughts. I'm going to die. I'm going to be eaten by this zombie. The flesh on my face will be bitten off. My stomach will be dug out, and my intestines will be dug out and eaten. Too scary. Lin Xiao was amused as she sensed this person's thoughts. This person had been making himself panic. She clearly did not intend to do anything to him, but he was imagining these terrifying scenes. Wasn't he trying to scare himself to death? At this time she picked up a small piece of paper, and there were 2 words written on it. Space. Then she placed it in front of the space ability user for him to see. She originally wanted him to clear out the things in the space. Then she let him go. In the end, this person suddenly saw the word space in his panic. Lin Xiao immediately sensed the crystal core in his head, as if a hole had been opened. She could actually see everything inside the energy crystal core. Huh. WTF. What's going on? Lin Xiao was also a little dumbfounded. She did not understand why this was happening. How could she see into someone else's space? Didn't they say that only the owner of the space could see the space? She closed her eyes in bewilderment and felt that after she closed her eyes, the space ability user's hole expanded a little, allowing her to see more clearly. When she opened her eyes, the space ability user's hole had shrunk. Looking at the space ability user's expression, she found that this person's eyes had already turned white. He looked as if he was about to faint. Lin Xiao. She really did not do it on purpose. Lin Xiao released her hand in a daze, and saw the space ability user softly fall to the ground. At the same time, she felt that the space ability user's hole had also closed. She turned her head to look at Xiaodong in confusion, and saw that Xiaodong was also looking at her with a puzzled expression. But Xiaodong's eyes were filled with more questions. Why did Lin Xiao suddenly rush in and kill Huang Xiao? Didn't she tell him to take revenge himself? And why did she bring him and this space ability user into the space? What did she do to him? That person fainted because of her. These sudden changes were all different from what she had told him before. Xiaodong's heart was filled with all sorts of questions. Lin Xiao saw the look in his eyes and knew what he was thinking. She took out a piece of paper and scribbled a sentence. Level 5 zombies have appeared outside. Just one sentence was enough to explain her sudden behavior just now. Outside the space after Lin Xiao pulled the 2 into the space. In the distance, a figure leaped over like a ferocious beast. Chapter 43. That's right, the reason why Lin Xiao suddenly rushed in. She quickly took care of Huang Xiao and brought the 2 into the space. It was because she sensed a level 5 zombie leader with a familiar aura rushing towards them. Obviously, this was the familiar person from before. And the other party also smelled Lin Xiao's aura, so it followed it to find them. The level 5 zombie leader's sensing ability was much stronger than Lin Xiao's. Not long after Lin Xiao came out of the space, it sensed it. Lin Xiao looked at the space ability user lying on the ground. She thought about what happened just now. Why could she see into the other party's space? Was this another one of her skills? She suddenly realized that after she became a zombie, she gained a lot of skills. Telepathy, space invisibility, and the strength of her body was more than 5 times what it was before. Now she had another skill that could sense other people's space. It was just that she was not proficient in these skills yet. Her space was too mysterious. Other than being able to bring people in, it seemed to have many other uses like the lake water. There seemed to be other uses, but she had not discovered it yet. And with telepathy, she found that she could easily know the thoughts of zombies that were lower than her. Higher level ones were a bit more difficult. And the thoughts of humans seemed to need to be very close to her to be able to sense them. As for space invisibility, she really did not know where to start. Now that she could sense other people's space, she also did not know what was going on. She still needed to do some experiments. Thinking about it, Lin Xiao directly grabbed the space ability user's collar and dragged him to the edge of the lake. Then she pressed his head down into the water. Not long after, the space ability user began to struggle with his hands and feet. Seeing that he had woken up, Lin Xiao grabbed his collar and lifted him up. She threw him onto the shore. Ugh! Cough 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 cough. The space ability user who had choked on a lot of water lay on the ground and coughed awkwardly. Lin Xiao did not give him time to react and squatted in front of him again. She stretched out her hand, opened her fingers and held his forehead. The space ability user was choked to the point that his head was still unclear of what was going on, when he suddenly felt a hand pressing on his forehead. Then he suddenly felt dizzy, and his mind began to blur. The moment Lin Xiao's hand touched the head of the spatial ability user, she immediately sensed something. Closing her eyes, she saw a patch of white fog. In the white fog, there was a circular hole about the size of a window. She tried to move closer to the hole, but it moved closer to her. Lin Xiao saw that there were a lot of daily necessities and some food. She and Xiedong couldn't eat it, but they could give it to Wu Yueling. She retreated and opened her eyes. The eyes of the spatial ability user in his hand rolled back again. This time it was even more serious than before. He was foaming at the mouth. Lin Xiao quickly let go. Her eyes flashed. It seemed that her spying on his space had caused a huge burden on his body. Or was it spiritual? At this time Xiedong also walked over, and the way he looked at the space ability user was extremely cold. There was even a desire to take a bite out of him, but he suppressed that desire. He held the crystal core in his hand as if he was absorbing a corpse's core. He gathered all the heat in his body into his palm and felt the crystal core melt. Then he clenched his fist, and the energy from the crystal core immediately seeped into his palm. It mixed with the heat in his palm and returned to his body. When he finished absorbing the crystal core, he saw Lin Xiao had just let go of the spatial ability user. But this time the spatial ability user wasn't in a good state, he was foaming at the mouth. Seeing Xiedong walking over, Lin Xiao wrote something on a piece of paper. How did the crystal core's energy affect you? Xiedong sensed it and shook his head. He didn't feel anything. It was as if the energy inside Huang Zhao's crystal core had disappeared into his body. There was no increase in energy like when he absorbed the corpse's core. Lin Xiao looked at him strangely. There didn't seem to be any changes when she absorbed the core. She thought it was a problem with her physique. Why was Xiedong the same as her? At this time, Xiedong came over and looked at the spatial ability user who had fainted again. His eyes were a bit blank, and he kept swallowing his saliva. As soon as he got closer, he could smell that sweet scent. That feeling of hunger was crazily surging, making him want to take a bite. But his rationality told him that this was the smell of human flesh, the smell of human flesh. When he thought of eating human flesh, he felt nauseous. On one side was physical hunger, and on the other was mental disgust. This made him feel very uncomfortable. Seeing him like this, Lin Xiao knew that he was being tempted by his hunger. She thought for a bit, then wrote on the paper, "If you want to eat him, I won't stop you. After all, it's a natural instinct for zombies to eat humans. And human flesh can also provide the energy needed by zombies." Seeing this, Xiedong was stunned. What does this reaction mean? He immediately shook his head resolutely, then turned around. Once again he walked away. Looking at his back, Lin Xiao suddenly felt a bit lonely and desolate. These days I've already gotten used to being a zombie, but this person still hasn't accepted the fact that I'm a zombie. A lot of things have changed. Lin Xiao herself was an optimistic person with a strong ability to adapt and accept things. Since I've become a zombie, I'll just let it change. She's still her. She still has to find her family and friends. Even if she can't appear in front of them, she still has to see them live a good life from afar. Then she can rest assured. Anyway, she used to be a special forces soldier, often going on dangerous missions, and could lose her life at any time. Her family has long accepted this. They've also made mental preparations. So now she'll just treat it as if she died on a mission, but she can still live by their side with another identity. That's enough. So she still has to go back to find them. But Xiedong is different. Xiedong's thoughts aren't as open as hers. But Lin Xiao can't be bothered to care about him. The two of them will soon part ways anyway. What happens to him, that's his own business. She can't say anything after all. The two of them don't have any relationship or feelings. She only saved him because she doesn't want to see a fellow Special Forces soldier get killed by his own comrades. In the army they train every day. Team spirit has always been very important, trust in comrades is very important, and similarly, the trust of comrades in oneself is also very important. So they hate this kind of betrayal by their comrades, and reject it equally. But her strength still dragged her down, and it was a little too late to save her. If she could defeat that level 5 zombie leader, then she wouldn't have to be able to completely save herself. Therefore, Lin Xiao's desire to increase her strength grew stronger and stronger. Chapter 44. However, the first thing she needed to do was to make the spatial ability user hand over everything in the space. Lin Xiao did not feel that what she was doing was wrong. Collecting the enemy's weapons and other useful spoils of war was something she was required to do when she was in the army. She had often done such things in the past, let alone in the apocalypse. Perhaps bullying the weak was somewhat shameless, but who asked him to do something that harmed others? Besides, Lin Xiao did not intend to take his life. Looking at the person who fainted again, Lin Xiao could only press him into the water again. After going back and forth a few times, the spatial ability user's breath was already weak and his mind was not clear. Although Lin Xiao and the other person could not speak, she kept asking the spatial ability user to read a sentence. Take out everything in the space. However, this spatial ability user was not sure if he was scared out of his wits or something else. He was a little confused and did not respond to Lin Xiao's words at all. As for Lin Xiao, she could clearly sense the other person's space every time, but she could not enter it no matter what. When her consciousness got close to the hole, she felt as if there was an invisible membrane blocking her. She could only look but not touch the things inside. In the end, the spatial ability user was careless. He was tormented to death by Lin Xiao. Looking at the spatial ability user who had suddenly lost his breath and heartbeat, Lin Xiao looked innocently at Xiadong who had run back to watch the scene unknowingly. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Xiadong. Lin Xiao did not expect this person to suddenly die. She thought that the other person had just fainted like the previous few times. He would wake up after soaking in water. She did not expect that. He would not wake up after fainting. Now that he was dead, she could no longer sense the hole in the space. She looked at Xiadong awkwardly. After all, this person was her enemy, not hers. Xiadong did not have much of an opinion. After all, Lin Xiao was his savior. It did not matter if this person died. However, it was a pity for the things inside the space. Up until now, if a spatial ability user died, no one could obtain the things inside the space. No one would be able to obtain the things inside his space. Now, all space ability users had a life-saving condition. Lin Xiao looked at the dead dimensional ability user, then looked at Wu Yueling who was watching them from afar. Wu Yueling had been standing far away from them ever since they appeared. He seemed to be wary of Xiadong, who was beside Lin Xiao. Not because he was a zombie but because Wu Yueling was never close to people. Even in the base, only Wu Chongyue and Meng Yu were allowed to approach. Even Xiao Yunlong did not pay much attention to him. It was a special case that she could get close to Lin Xiao, but it didn't mean that she could get close to other people around her. Lin Xiao could also sense the space of space ability users. Although he was dead, his space did not disappear. It seemed to have been preserved in his crystal core. Right now, she had the urge to dig out the other party's crystal core and study it. But thinking that what she was going to do next might be a little bloody, she remembered that there was another little person in the space. This kind of skull-digging scene, of course, couldn't be seen by children. But she could not leave her own space, because the moment she closed her eyes, she felt her heart pounding. They could see the level 5 zombie outside, looking for something in the house where they killed Huang Xiao and the others. And at this time, in addition to it, there were 2 level 3 zombies standing obediently in the corner. The 3 zombies' mouths and teeth were full of blood. And the 3 corpses in the house at this time had their stomachs and heads dug out. They were lying on the ground dripping with blood. After the end of the world, zombies not only like to eat human flesh and drink human blood, but also especially like to eat human brains. High-level zombies like to eat human internal organs. Of course, they also like to eat brain. So after the end of the world, corpses that were often seen had their stomachs and heads dug out. At a glance, it was obvious that they had been eaten by zombies. Lin Xiao knew at a glance that the level 5 zombie was looking for her, because this zombie stayed at the window where she appeared for a long time. It was really persistent. It actually kept chasing her without letting go. Lin Xiao was somewhat speechless. Since she couldn't go out from the outside, she could only do it in this space. Since she couldn't let Xiao Budian see, she would let Xiadong block it. She wrote a sentence on the paper and handed it to Xiadong. After Xiadong saw it, he immediately went behind Lin Xiao to block her. He faced Wu Yueling so that she could only see herself and not what Lin Xiao was doing behind him. Lin Xiao looked back and did not see Wu Yueling's figure. Only then did she stretch out her claws and cut open the spatial ability user's head. When she cut off Huang Zhao's head just now, she smelled a rich fragrance. But at that time, she quickly took out the crystal core, and then brought Xiadong and the spatial ability user into her space. She didn't even have time to smell that fragrance. Now that she cut open the spatial ability user's head, she immediately smelled that fragrance again. No wonder other zombies would eat brain seeds, because this fragrance was different from human flesh. Human flesh was fragrant and sweet, but the brain was fragrant and fragrant. But it seemed even more delicious. Don't ask why Lin Xiao felt that way, it was just an instinct after smelling it. So the temptation of this brain was even greater. Not only did Lin Xiao fiercely smell it, but her mind was also a little sluggish. Even Xiadong behind her could not help but turn around and was forcefully sniffing in her direction. Lin Xiao immediately woke up and immediately reached out to push him away. Then she held her nose and did not breathe, although she did not know whether she was still breathing or not. In any case, she just held it. After quickly taking out the crystal core, Lin Xiao sensed the level 5 zombies outside. Seeing that he just jumped out of the window, it seemed that he was planning to leave. After he went out, Lin Xiao immediately grabbed the spatial ability user's corpse and quickly flashed. She directly threw the person out. Xiadong only saw Lin Xiao's figure flash, and the corpse in her hand was the moment she swayed. It disappeared from the place. In his eyes, it seemed that Lin Xiao did not go out. But only Lin Xiao herself knew that she had already gone out once. It was just that her movements were too fast and connected together. In Xiadong's eyes, it only flashed for a moment. And the two level 3 zombies outside who had not left only sensed a trace of her aura. They did not even see her figure, only saw a corpse being thrown out of thin air. When they saw food, they immediately rushed over. And Lin Xiao did not appear outside. She returned to her space again. After throwing the corpse out, the two of them were relieved. She could not help but take one last breath of that tempting fragrance, and then the smell quickly dissipated in her space. Without the invasion of the fragrance, Lin Xiao then calmed down and continued to study the crystal core in her hand. She did not dare to use her nails to pinch it, afraid that it would suddenly melt like the previous few times. She could only put it in the palm of her hand, but when the crystal core was put in her palm, it immediately became hot. Then, just like last time when she absorbed the corpse core of the level 3 zombie, it directly turned into energy. Chapter 45. A gentle warmth spread from her palm to her entire body, and then gathered in her mind. Lin Xiao. She seemed to have lost something that belonged to him. Lin Xiao looked at Xiadong. Although she was the one who dug it out, she did not think that it belonged to her. However, she did not think that it belonged to her. She had always thought that it belonged to Xiadong. She was just curious as to why she could see into someone else's space. She wanted to figure out what was going on. In the end, he was fooled around by her. Now he was killed by her, and the crystal core was also absorbed by her. So the problem was, where was the space? She looked at Xiadong awkwardly again, and saw that he was still sniffing around with his eyes closed. Obviously, he had not recovered from the fragrance of the brain. Just as Lin Xiao was about to tell him that she had melted the crystal core of the space ability user. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat, and the gratitude climbed to her forehead. Then she felt something on her forehead. She rolled her eyes and suddenly turned her head to look in another direction. At the edge of the white fog suddenly rolled up like a curtain and slowly turned into a door-like hole. Lin Xiao stood up and pulled Xiaodong, who had just come back to his senses. Then she walked toward the door-like hole. Xiaodong understood what was going on when she suddenly pulled him. Just as he was about to ask her what was going on, he looked up and saw the door-like hole that had suddenly appeared in front of him. A dark 2-meter-tall door-like hole appeared in the white fog. It looked a little strange. But this was Lin Xiao's space, so there should not be any danger. Lin Xiao pulled Xiaodong because she was afraid that when she looked at the hole, this guy would not be able to control himself and rushed to the other side of the lake to eat Wu Yueling. Actually, the area of Lin Xiao's space was not big. It looked like it was only 2 parts. One side was the lake and the other was the grass. At a glance, the square garden was only about 1,000 square meters, but the lake took up 60% of it. Then the surroundings were blocked by a white fog. Actually, he did not know that when Lin Xiao first entered this space, it was smaller than it was now. It was just that Lin Xiao did not realize that her space had expanded quite a bit. Or rather, the fog had spread. So, it did feel a little strange to suddenly appear in a door-like hole. Lin Xiao pulled Xiaodong to the edge of her space. He stood in front of the door that had suddenly appeared and looked inside. He was dumbfounded again. Isn't that the space of that spatial ability user? Why did he appear in her space? Stunned, she turned around and looked at Xiaodong in confusion. Xiaodong looked at her expressionlessly. He did not understand what she was trying to say. But when he saw this space, he also felt strange. However, he didn't know that this was the space of the space ability user. He just thought that it might have come from Lin Xiao's space. He found it strange that this strange door didn't appear before, but now it suddenly appeared again. Now, when he saw Lin Xiao, he also had a blank expression on his face. Unfortunately, Lin Xiao's face was too ugly, so his expression was somewhat distorted. Therefore, Xiaodong did not understand what she meant. Seeing him like this, Lin Xiao also sensed his thoughts. I knew he was still out of it. So she wrote another sentence for him to read. This was the dimension of that spatial ability user. After Xiaodong took a look at her words, he was slightly stunned. Then, his eyes widened as he turned to look at Lin Xiao in disbelief. Lin Xiao nodded at him. Xiaodong was also stunned. This Lin Xiao had such an ability? She turned someone else's space into her own? Lin Xiao waved at him, and the two of them entered the hole. As soon as they entered the space, they realized that it wasn't very big. It was about the size of a small room of 70 to 80 square meters, completely incomparable to Lin Xiao's. But there was oxygen inside so they could breathe. No wonder living people could enter. Lin Xiao looked at the pile of things in the corner of the space. Other than some clothes, weapons, and some miscellaneous items, there were a few packets of biscuits and instant noodles, as well as a bottle of mineral water. A few bottles had already been taken out. Lin Xiao walked over to pick up the biscuits and looked at the date. Sure enough, they had expired. But even if they had expired, they were still very precious in the post-apocalyptic world. Everyone in the post-apocalyptic world was no longer picky about food. Who dared to be picky? There would be nothing left if they continued to pick. Water was also very precious, because the water sources on the mainland had basically been infected. Therefore, the water in the base was still produced by ice and water ability users. But this space ability user wasn't very good. Although he had space, he didn't collect many things. The most precious thing was a few barrels of gasoline. She didn't know if he got it himself, or if someone else let him in. It was probably because of these barrels of gasoline that he was able to survive until now. When they were downstairs, they also saw the car parked at the side. That car belonged to Xiaodong. And Xiaodong had already told Lin Xiao with a hand gesture. It was a military off-road vehicle. It was where Huang Xiao and the rest had stopped. Lin Xiao rummaged through the pile of miscellaneous items, trying to find a map. She didn't expect to find a map. She took it out and saw that it was a map of Shanghai. Their current location was in the HP district. If they wanted to go south, they would have to pass through Suhui, Minhang, and JS districts before they could enter Zhe province. No matter what, with this map, she would at least know where to go. Lin Xiao took out an A4-sized book from the pile of miscellaneous items. The handwriting was also easier to write. It wasn't as difficult as Xiaodong's palm-sized note. She sat down cross-legged and waved at Xiaodong. She wanted to talk to him about his next plan. Lin Xiao felt that she should go south to find her family. She needed Xiedong's car and the barrels of gasoline here. She just didn't know if Xiedong was willing to give it to her. Although they had talked about this before, Xiedong didn't agree to give it to her. He just wanted to say that he had a car. But now he had killed the person he wanted to kill and found the car. The level 5 zombies outside might still be nearby, but if she wanted to leave, there was no other way. It was not that there was no other way, so she had to ask Xiedong now. What was he going to do? Xiedong also sat down casually and looked at Lin Xiao. In fact, he wanted to know what level he was now. Level 3? It should be, because he had wisdom and memory. But his movement ability didn't seem to be as flexible and agile as level 3 zombies. He felt that he was just a little more agile than normal zombies. Lin Xiao took out a pen and wrote on the paper, "The person you wanted to kill is dead. Where are you going next?" "No matter where you go, I want to borrow the car and the gasoline here." Xiedong was stunned when he saw these words. He was in a daze.